The first thing that bothered me wasn't the gate. It was the wind. Not the normal mountain wind that moves through trees and brushes past your ears. This wind came from the mine. It drifted out of the dark opening like a slow breath, warm and damp, carrying a smell that reminded me of old metal and wet stone. That made no sense. According to the county records I had read the night before, this mine had been sealed in 1978. A collapse killed 6 workers, and the state ordered the entrance filled with concrete and rock. But standing there in the quiet Appalachian woods, I could see the entrance clearly. Open. Not wide open, just enough that someone could slip through the broken gate and disappear into the black tunnel behind it. The rusted warning sign hanging on the gate creaked softly. Danger shaft SEALED by state order. I lifted my camera and took a photo. The flash briefly lit the tunnel beyond the bars. The beam didn't reach very far, maybe 20 feet. After that, the darkness swallowed everything. I lowered the camera and looked around. The forest was quiet in that heavy way that sometimes happens in the mountains. No birds, no insects, just tall trees standing still in the gray afternoon light. For a moment I wondered if I had the wrong location. But the coordinates on my phone matched exactly. Abandoned mine number 12, be closed almost 50 years ago. I stepped closer to the gate. Rust flaked off when I touched the metal. The chain that once locked it was hanging loose, snapped clean in half. The broken ends were dark with age. Whatever opened this gate, it hadn't happened recently. That thought stayed in my head longer than it should have, because it meant something strange. If the chain broke years ago, why hadn't anyone reported it? This wasn't some forgotten hiking trail. The mine sat less than a mile from a county road. Hunters passed through these woods every fall. Local kids probably explored the area too. Someone would have noticed an open mine entrance, unless they avoided it. I took another photo, then another. The tunnel entrance framed by the bent iron gate looked perfect for the documentary series I was working on. Forgotten places, locations history tried to erase. Usually abandoned buildings. Hospitals, schools, empty factories. But mines were different. They weren't just empty structures. They were holes in the earth. Deep ones. I leaned slightly past the gate and aimed my flashlight inside. The beam slid across damp rock walls and old wooden support beams. Water dripped slowly somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed in a way that made it hard to tell how far the tunnel stretched. 20 feet. 200. There was no way to know. The warm air moved past my face again. That bothered me more than the open gate. Mines don't breathe. At least sealed ones don't. Airflow usually means 2 openings, an entrance and an exit somewhere deeper underground. That's how ventilation works. But every map I had seen showed only one shaft here. I stood there for a long moment thinking about that. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I ducked under the gate. The temperature changed immediately. Outside, the air had that cool mountain bite that comes with early autumn. Inside the tunnel, the air felt warmer, thicker, almost humid. My footsteps crunched softly on loose gravel. I kept the flashlight low, sweeping the beam across the ground first. Old habit. Mines sometimes hide surprises on the floor. Rusty tools, loose cables, or hose. About 10 feet in, I stopped. The forest behind me looked different now, smaller somehow. The sunlight outside the entrance seemed duller, like it had dimmed while I walked inside. I took another photo of the tunnel. The flash filled the space for half a second, and in that moment I noticed something odd. Footprints. Not mine. They were faint, but they were there in the thin layer of gray dust covering the floor. Boot prints leading deeper into the mine. I crouched down and studied them. The edges looked soft, like they had been there a long time. But they were clear enough to follow. Someone had definitely walked into this tunnel before me. Maybe a hiker. Maybe another photographer. Still, something about the tracks made me uneasy. They went in, but I couldn't see any coming out. I stood up slowly. Probably just covered by dust, I muttered to myself. My voice sounded strange inside the tunnel. It bounced off the rock walls and came back softer, stretched out. I started walking again. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. The forest sounds faded first, then even the wind disappeared. All that remained was the drip of water and the soft crunch of my boots. About 30 feet in, the tunnel curved slightly to the left. That's when I saw the markings. At first, I thought they were scratches from mining equipment. But when I stepped closer, I realized they were letters. Names. Dozens of them, carved into the rock wall beside the tunnel. Some were shallow and faded. Others looked newer. I ran my fingers across one of them. Eli Carter, 1956. Another below it. Tom Grady, 1961. And another. Then another. Miners, probably. Workers leaving their names during breaks. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the last name on the wall. It looked fresh compared to the others. The rock dust around the letters still clung to the edges. I leaned closer and read it slowly. Daniel H. No last name, just an initial. Below it was a date. I stared at it for several seconds. Someone had been here 3 years ago. Inside a mine that was supposed to be sealed since 1978. A quiet drop of water echoed somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Drip, drip, drip. For the first time since entering the mine, I felt that tight sensation in my chest that comes when something isn't right. Not dangerous yet, just wrong. I turned my flashlight deeper into the tunnel. The beam stretched forward, but the darkness still swallowed most of it. And then I noticed something else. Another set of footprints. These were clearer than the ones near the entrance. They started near the wall where the names were carved, and they led farther into the mine. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach tighten. The strange thing was their direction. They weren't facing away from the entrance. They were facing toward it. Like someone deeper in the mine had walked this far, and then stopped. Right where I was standing. I slowly turned the flashlight toward the darkness behind me. The tunnel entrance was still there. The gray daylight outside looked calm and harmless. But the warm air from the mine moved past my neck again. Stronger this time. Like a slow breath leaving a sleeping body. And for the first time since arriving, a strange thought slipped quietly into my mind. If the footprints came from deeper in the mine, then someone else had already been inside. Someone who walked up to this exact spot, and then turned around, not leaving the mine, but going back down into the darkness. The first step deeper into the mine felt heavier than the last one. I don't know why. Maybe it was the footprints. Maybe it was the name carved into the wall. Or maybe it was the strange feeling that the air down there was alive somehow. I stood where the footprints ended, staring into the dark tunnel ahead. The beam of my flashlight reached maybe 30 feet before fading into black rock and shadows. The tunnel curved again farther ahead. After that, there was nothing but darkness. I told myself something simple. Someone had explored the mine before me. That was all. Old mines attract explorers, photographers, curious hikers. But there was still that detail I couldn't ignore. The footprints had come from deeper inside the mine. And whoever made them had turned around exactly where I was standing. Why? I slowly stepped forward again. The gravel crunched under my boots, and the sound echoed through the tunnel like distant thunder rolling through stone. The deeper I walked, the warmer the air became. Not hot, just warm enough to feel wrong. Mines are supposed to get colder as you go down. The sun never reaches these tunnels. The earth usually holds the cold. But this air felt like it had traveled a long way underground. Like it was moving. I stopped walking and turned off my flashlight for a second. Darkness swallowed everything instantly. It was thick, heavy, the kind of darkness that presses against your eyes. Then I felt it again. Air, moving across my face. Slow, steady, like the mine was breathing. I turned the flashlight back on. 2 openings, I whispered. That was the logical explanation. Somewhere deeper in the mine, there had to be another exit. A collapsed shaft maybe, or a hidden tunnel leading to the surface. Air was flowing between them. That made sense. What didn't make sense was the sound. At first it was so faint I thought it was just water dripping. But when I stopped moving again and listened carefully, the sound came back. A dull rhythmic echo. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. My chest tightened. Footsteps. Very far away. So far that the sound barely carried through the stone tunnel. But the rhythm was unmistakable. Step. Step. Then silence again. I stood perfectly still, holding the flashlight steady. The beam shook a little in my hand. Hello, I called. My voice echoed down the tunnel and faded slowly. No answer. For a few seconds there was nothing. Just quiet. Then the sound returned. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. But this time it felt different. Not closer. Not farther either. Just there. Like someone walking slowly through a different part of the mine. A strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe there were other tunnels branching off somewhere ahead. Old mining systems are like underground mazes, hundreds of passages twisting through the mountain. Maybe someone was exploring another tunnel. Maybe they hadn't heard me. I started walking again. Carefully. Each step felt louder than the last. The tunnel widened slightly after another 50 feet. The wooden support beams looked older here, dark with age and moisture. Some of them leaned a little. One beam had cracked clean through the middle. I raised the camera and took a picture. The flash lit up the tunnel in bright white light for half a second. And in that moment, something strange appeared in the distance. Not a person, not movement, just dust. A thin cloud of gray dust, drifting slowly through the beam of light farther down the tunnel. It hung in the air, swirling gently, like something had disturbed it recently. My stomach tightened again. Dust doesn't float like that unless something moves through it. I lowered the camera. The flashlight beam returned, softer and narrower than the flash had been. The dust was still there, slowly drifting through the air. And then I noticed something else. The airflow had changed. Before, the warm air had been moving toward the entrance behind me. Now it was flowing the other direction, into the mine. I felt it brush against my neck and shoulders. Slow, steady, like the direction had quietly reversed. That didn't make any sense. Air currents underground usually stay consistent. They don't just change direction, unless something blocks the airflow or opens a new path. My mind started running through possibilities. A cave-in deeper inside, a collapse somewhere, or someone moving through the tunnels. I listened again. The footsteps were gone now. The mine had returned to silence, but the quiet felt different this time. heavier, like the tunnel itself was waiting. I kept moving. Another bend appeared ahead, this one sharper than the last. The beam of my flashlight slid along the rock wall as I turned the corner. And then I stopped. A wooden cart track ran across the tunnel floor. Two narrow metal rails disappearing into the darkness ahead. Mine carts used to roll through here decades ago. The rails looked rusted, but still intact. I followed them with the flashlight. They led straight down a long corridor. And at the far end, something blocked the tunnel. At first, I thought it was a rock collapse. But when I stepped closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't rock. It was wood. Dozens of wooden boards nailed across the tunnel entrance, forming a rough barrier. Old warning paint covered the planks. The words had faded, but I could still read them. Level 3 closed. Authorized personnel only. I stared at the barrier for a moment. That explained the airflow change. Air was leaking through the gaps in the boards, from somewhere beyond that sealed tunnel. I stepped closer and shined the light between the wooden planks. The beam squeezed through the narrow gaps. At first I saw nothing, just another tunnel continuing into darkness. Then the light caught something on the floor beyond the barrier. Footprints, fresh ones, much clearer than the dusty tracks near the entrance. The shape of the boots was sharp, defined, like they had been made recently, and they were heading deeper into level 3. A slow chill moved through my chest. Someone had gone past this barrier recently, but there was no door, no opening, just wooden planks nailed tightly across the tunnel. I moved the flashlight higher along the boards, and that's when I saw it. One plank near the bottom had been pulled loose. Not broken, carefully removed. The nails had been bent outward. The gap was just big enough for a person to crawl through. My throat felt dry suddenly. Someone had definitely been here. Not decades ago. Not even years ago. Recently. The warm air flowing through the gap brushed against my face again. Stronger now, carrying a strange smell with it. Not the usual damp stone scent of a mine. Something else. Metal. And something faintly sour. Like old sweat trapped in closed air. I crouched down and aimed the flashlight through the opening. The tunnel on the other side looked narrower, rougher. The rails continued into the darkness. But the strange part wasn't the tunnel. It was the ground. The dust there looked disturbed in long streaks, as if something heavy had been dragged across the floor. Not once, many times. Long parallel marks stretching deeper into the mine. I felt my heartbeat getting louder in my ears. Then the sound came back. The footsteps. This time they were clearer. Not echoes. Real steps. Slow. Deliberate. Somewhere beyond the wooden barrier. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. And the strange thing was, they didn't sound like someone walking away. They sounded like someone slowly walking closer. From deep inside level 3. I heard my name before I ever saw the collapsed shaft. Not loud. Not clear. Just a thin whisper that slid through the tunnel like breath, moving through dry leaves. Kashif. I froze. At first I thought my brain had made it up. When you spend too long in silence, your mind starts filling in the empty space. Little sounds begin to feel like words. But then the whisper came again. Soft. Broken. Kashif. My hand tightened around the flashlight. No one should have known my name down there. No one even knew I was here. The county office barely remembered the mine existed. I had driven up alone, parked half a mile down the road, and hiked the rest of the way through the woods. Still, the whisper had sounded real. Too real. I slowly leaned closer to the loose plank in the barrier and shined my light through the gap. The narrow tunnel of level 3 stretched forward for maybe 40 feet before opening into a wider chamber. The rails continued inside, half buried under gray dust. Everything looked still. Empty. I listened carefully. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the air moved again. That same slow current I had felt earlier. Warm air sliding through the tunnel like a steady breath. And inside that breath, the faint sound returned. Not one voice. Many whispers overlapping each other so quietly, they almost blended into the wind. My heart began beating harder. The sound wasn't coming from the tunnel in front of me. It was coming from somewhere lower, deeper underground. I stepped back from the barrier and looked around the chamber behind me. That's when I noticed the side passage. It sat halfway down the wall behind the old cart rails, a narrow opening sloping downward at a sharp angle, almost hidden behind a leaning support beam. I hadn't seen it before. The flashlight beam slid into the passage. Broken rock covered the floor, jagged chunks scattered across the ground like a frozen landslide. A cave-in. The tunnel had collapsed. I walked closer. The air felt warmer near the opening, and the whispers were louder now. Still quiet, still distant, but clearer. My name floated through them again. Kashif. A strange cold feeling spread across my shoulders. I crouched near the collapsed tunnel and aimed the flashlight deeper into the rubble. Most of the passage was blocked by fallen rock, large slabs pressed against each other, forming a rough wall of stone. But near the bottom, there was a narrow gap. Just a thin crack between two rocks. And from that crack, warm air was flowing out. I leaned closer. The whispers became clearer. Not loud enough to understand every word. Just fragments. Broken pieces of voices. Still down here. Can't see the light. Shift never ended. My chest tightened. The voices sounded tired. Weak. Like people speaking after being trapped somewhere for a very long time. A terrible thought pushed into my mind. The collapse. The accident report I had read. 6 miners trapped when part of level 3 caved in. Their bodies were never recovered. The state sealed the mine after that. I suddenly felt sick. I slowly leaned my ear closer to the crack between the rocks. The air moving through the gap brushed against my cheek. Warm, damp, and carrying the smell of deep earth. The whispers grew clearer. Still working. Don't stop digging. Boss said the shift ain't over. I pulled my head back. That didn't make sense. None of it did. Those miners had died almost 50 years ago. No one could still be down there. The logical part of my brain tried to find another explanation. Air moving through narrow tunnels can create strange sounds. Wind whistling through rock cracks sometimes sounds like voices. But wind doesn't say names. I stared at the crack in the rubble. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The dust around the collapsed rocks wasn't smooth. It was disturbed. Long, shallow marks ran across the gray powder, like something had been pushed against the rocks from the other side. Repeatedly, like hands scraping the stone. I swallowed slowly. The whispers came again. Too dark. Need more lamps. Someone's here. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. The last sentence had sounded different. Clearer. Almost aware. Like the voices had noticed me. I forced myself to breathe slowly. This is wind, I whispered. But the words felt weak. even to me. I leaned forward again and shined the light through the crack. Of course, the beam didn't reach very far. Just a narrow sliver of darkness beyond the rocks. Still, something moved. Not fast, not sudden, just a faint shift in the shadows, like someone slowly stepping closer behind the stone. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. Heavy, waiting. Then one voice spoke again, clearer than the others. Low, tired, Kashif. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. That voice hadn't come from the wind. It had shape, breath, a person speaking softly. I stepped back from the collapse, my boots sliding slightly on loose gravel. How do you know my name? I asked before I could stop myself. My voice echoed weakly in the chamber. For several seconds, nothing answered. The air kept flowing through the crack, warm and steady. Then another whisper came from the darkness behind the rocks. You came back. My throat felt dry. I've never been here before. The whisper paused. Then the voice answered slowly. Yes, you have. My mind raced. That made no sense. I had never even heard of this mine until a week ago, while researching abandoned sites. The voice continued. You left us. A strange chill crept down my spine. More whispers joined the first voice now. Many voices, soft and overlapping, sealed the tunnel, took the lamps, left us in the dark. My breathing became shallow. They were describing the collapse, the moment the mine sealed them underground. But something in their tone felt wrong. Not angry, not accusing, just confused, lost, like people who had been waiting a very long time. Then one voice rose slightly above the others. Still quiet, still tired, but clearer than before. You remember the shift, don't you? My chest tightened again. For a brief moment, an image flashed through my mind. Not a memory exactly, just a strange feeling. Dark tunnels, the smell of cold dust, the sound of metal tools striking rock. I shook my head quickly. No, I whispered. The whispers shifted again. A soft ripple of voices moving through the darkness. He forgot. Too much time. Surface took his memory. My heart was beating so loudly, I could hear it echo in the chamber. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then the voice spoke one more time. And this time it didn't sound confused. It sounded certain. That's all right, Kashif. The whisper drifted through the crack in the rock. The shift isn't over yet. The warm air rushed out of the collapsed tunnel again. Stronger than before. Like something deep underground had just taken a long breath. And somewhere far below the rocks, metal struck stone. Once, twice, then the sound of slow digging began again, in the darkness beneath the mine. The first thing I noticed about the mine was the silence. Not normal silence. The kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. I remember sitting in the truck outside the gate that first night, engine off, headlights cutting across a stretch of empty desert. The road behind me had disappeared into darkness miles back. No towns, no houses, just rock, sand, and the black outline of mountains under a sky full of cold stars. The mine entrance sat halfway up the slope in front of me. A wide cut in the rock. Old wooden beams framed the opening, leaning slightly like tired bones. A chain-link fence covered the front, with a small security shack built beside it. My new office. I checked the time on my phone. 10:42 p.m. First shift. The job had sounded almost too easy when the company hired me. Private security contract, 12-hour overnight shifts, sit in the shack, watch the camera feeds, and call someone if anything strange happened. But the part that stuck in my head was what the manager said before I left the office. Nothing ever happens out there. He had said it casually, like a man repeating a line he had used many times before. I stepped out of the truck and the desert air hit me, cold, dry. It carried the faint smell of metal from the old copper mine. The wind moved slowly across the rocks. Far away, a coyote howled once and then went quiet. I grabbed my backpack and walked to the shack. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the room was barely bigger than a storage closet. One desk, one chair, a row of dusty monitors mounted on the wall. The security system hummed softly. 6 camera feeds, 4 underground, 2 outside the entrance. I sat down and leaned back in the chair. "All right," I said quietly to the empty room. The job felt simple. Watch screens, drink coffee, stay awake until sunrise. I switched on the desk lamp. Warm yellow light filled the shack. It made the place feel almost comfortable. Someone had left an old thermos on the counter and a stack of outdated mining reports beside it. The camera feeds flickered slightly. Camera 1 showed the entrance tunnel, just rock walls and a dirt floor stretching into darkness. Camera 2 pointed down an old equipment corridor. Rusted rails ran along the ground where ore carts used to roll. Camera 3 faced a storage chamber. Camera 4 looked deeper into the mine, where the tunnel split into several branches. The last 2 cameras watched the outside fence. Everything looked still. Empty. Exactly what I expected. I leaned forward and picked up the small radio on the desk. "Security check," I said. Static answered. Then a voice came through. "Control here." "Just confirming signal," I said. "Copy that," the voice replied. "Everything quiet." I looked at the monitors again. Nothing moved. "All quiet." "Good," the man said. "Call if anything changes." The radio clicked off. For a while the shift felt peaceful. I drank coffee, read through some old mining notes. Every few minutes I glanced at the screens. The mine stayed silent. Hours passed slowly. Midnight came and went. The desert outside the shack grew colder. Around 1:30 a.m. I stepped outside for a moment to stretch my legs. The sky was clear. Stars filled the darkness like scattered glass. The mountains looked larger at night, their shadows swallowing the horizon. I walked to the fence and looked at the mine entrance. From this close, the tunnel looked deeper than it had earlier. The darkness inside it felt thick, heavy, like something solid sitting in the rock. A strange feeling crept into my chest. It wasn't fear. Not yet. Just the sense that the mine was watching me the same way I watched it. I shook the thought away and went back inside the shack. The monitors were still running, still quiet. I sat down again, but something had changed. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. The camera feeds looked exactly the same. Same tunnels, same shadows, same empty corridors. Then I noticed the movement. Camera 2, the equipment corridor. A faint cloud of dust drifted slowly across the floor. I leaned closer to the screen. The dust moved gently through the air, like something had disturbed it. But the tunnel was empty. No person, no animal, nothing. I stared at it for several seconds. Then the dust settled again. The corridor returned to stillness. "Probably airflow," I muttered. Old mines do that sometimes. Air currents moving through cracks in the rock. Still, something about the movement bothered me. I checked the other cameras. Camera 1. Nothing. Camera 3. Storage room still empty. Camera 4. Tunnel intersection. I froze. For a moment, I thought I saw someone. Just a shape, standing near the edge of the frame. But when I leaned closer, the shape was gone. Only darkness remained in that corner of the tunnel. I blinked slowly. "Eyes playing tricks," I said. "Night shifts do that. Your brain starts inventing patterns when you stare at screens too long." I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. The room hummed quietly again. Everything returned to normal. Or at least it seemed that way. About 20 minutes later, the first real strange thing happened. The sound didn't come from the cameras. It came from the mine itself. A dull metallic echo rolled through the rock outside. Clang. The sound was deep, distant, but unmistakable, like metal striking stone somewhere far underground. I sat up straight. The shack was silent again. The monitors showed nothing unusual, but the sound had been real. I was sure of it. I grabbed the radio. "Control." Static answered for a moment. Then the same sleepy voice returned. "Yeah." "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" "Sound from the mine," I said. "Metal like equipment." There was a pause. Then a small laugh. "Buddy, that mine hasn't had equipment running since the 80s. "I know," I said quietly. Another pause. "Probably rock shifting," he said. "Happens sometimes." Maybe he was right. Mines settle over time. Loose metal rails can shift. Old beams can crack. Still, the sound hadn't felt random. It had felt deliberate, like someone hitting metal with a tool. I set the radio down slowly. The shack felt colder now. I looked back at the camera screens. Everything remained still, except for one small detail. Camera 4 again. The tunnel intersection. The corner of the frame where I thought I saw someone earlier now looked darker than the rest of the tunnel. Not shadow, just darker. And the strange thing was, that darkness seemed to be slowly moving. I knew something was wrong the moment camera 6 flickered. It didn't cut out. It didn't lose signal. The picture just trembled for a second, like the camera had shivered. I leaned forward in the chair and stared at the monitor. Camera 6 watched one of the deeper tunnels, a section that split away from the main rail corridor and led into an older part of the mine. The manager had mentioned it earlier during training. "Those tunnels were closed after the collapse," he said. "Cameras are still there, but no one goes down that way anymore." On the screen, the tunnel looked exactly the way abandoned tunnels always do. Dust on the floor. Support beams dark with age. A thin trail of rails half buried under dirt. The camera angle pointed straight down the passage. Nothing moved. Still, something felt different. I squinted at the monitor. The far end of the tunnel looked darker than it should have. Not shadow. More like movement inside shadow. I leaned closer. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass of the screen. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it moved again. A shape. Just a faint gray shift at the far end of the tunnel. I blinked slowly. The shape was gone. The corridor returned to empty silence. I sat back in the chair. "Okay," I muttered. Night shift brain again. That was the problem with staring at monitors for hours. Your eyes start playing tricks. Still, I didn't look away. Something about camera 6 had my full attention now. The image stayed still for almost a minute. Then a thin cloud of dust drifted across the floor. The same thing I had seen earlier on camera 2. Except this time, the dust wasn't drifting randomly. It was moving in a line, like something had walked through it. My chest tightened slightly. I leaned forward again. The dust settled. The tunnel returned to silence. And then the shape appeared again. This time it stayed longer. At the far end of the corridor, right where the darkness swallowed the rails, a faint outline stood for maybe 2 seconds. Tall, still, then it stepped sideways and disappeared behind the rock wall. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. Someone was inside the mine. That was the only explanation. But that didn't make sense. The entrance was locked. I had the only key. No vehicles had come down the road. And even if someone had managed to sneak in earlier, why would they be in the sealed tunnels? I grabbed the radio. Control. Static crackled. Then the same tired voice answered. Yeah. I think someone's inside the mine. There was a short pause. What makes you say that? Camera 6, I said. I just saw movement. Animal maybe. I looked back at the monitor. No, I said slowly, too big. Another pause. Probably dust, the man said. Old tunnels shift sometimes. I watched the screen. The far end of the corridor stayed empty. Yeah, I said finally, maybe. But I didn't believe it. I set the radio down. The room felt colder than before. The monitors hummed quietly in the dark shack. For a while, nothing else happened. I almost convinced myself the shape had been nothing. Just shadows. Just tired eyes. Then camera 6 flickered again. The image sharpened, and I saw them. Not one shape. Three faint figures standing at the far end of the tunnel. They looked pale against the darkness, almost transparent. I froze in my chair. The figures didn't move at first. They just stood there, close together, facing the camera. I leaned closer to the screen. The resolution wasn't great. The camera was old, but I could make out the rough shapes of shoulders and heads. People standing in the sealed tunnel. The strangest part wasn't their presence. It was how still they were. No shifting. No walking. Just standing. Watching. I slowly reached for the radio again. Before I could speak, the figures moved. All 3 stepped forward at the same time. Dust rose beneath their feet. My stomach tightened. Control, I said quickly into the radio. I'm seeing multiple figures in the mine now. The voice answered after a moment. You serious? Yeah, I whispered. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. The figures continued walking slowly toward the camera. Their movements looked wrong somehow. Too smooth. Too quiet. The dust on the floor barely reacted to their steps. How many? The voice asked. 3. Another pause on the radio. All right, the man said finally. Stay in the shack. Don't go inside. I'll notify the supervisor. Copy. The radio clicked off. I kept watching. The 3 figures moved deeper into the camera's view. Now I could see more detail. Their bodies looked thin. Long coats or jackets hung loosely from their shoulders. Hard hats. Old mining helmets. My breathing slowed. They looked like miners. But that made no sense. No one worked here anymore. And then something strange happened. One of the figures turned slightly. Not toward the tunnel. Toward the camera itself. I leaned closer. The camera light caught its face for a moment. The image was grainy, but I could still see enough. Its skin looked gray. Dust covered. The helmet on its head looked old, the kind miners wore decades ago. But the thing that bothered me most was its eyes. Even through the poor camera quality, they looked dark. Hollow, like deep shadows where eyes should be. The figure lifted one arm slowly. It pointed directly at the camera. At me. My stomach dropped. Then the camera flickered again. The image distorted for half a second. When it cleared, the tunnel was empty. All three figures were gone. Just dust drifting slowly through the corridor. I stared at the screen. Nothing moved. I checked the other cameras quickly. Camera 1. Empty entrance tunnel. Camera 2. Empty rail corridor. Camera 3. Storage room. Still empty. Camera 4. The intersection. I froze again. Someone was standing there. Not three figures. Just one. Standing in the center of the intersection, perfectly still. And it was facing the camera. Facing me. I felt a strange pressure building in my chest. The figure didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't walk. It just stood there. Watching. Then slowly, it lifted one hand. Not pointing. Not waving. Just raising it slightly. Like someone trying to get my attention. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold. The helmet on its head had a number painted across the front. The number was faded, but I could still read it. Camera 6. The elevator light turned on by itself. I noticed it because the control panel in the shack suddenly glowed red. At first, I thought the system had glitched. The mine was old. The security equipment looked like it had been installed sometime in the late 90s. Wires ran across the wall like tangled vines, and half the switches were labeled with faded tape. But the red light wasn't blinking randomly. It was steady. Elevator active. I stared at the panel for a long moment. The mine had an elevator shaft that ran down the main access tunnel. It used to carry workers between levels back when the mine was still operating. But during training, the supervisor had told me something very clearly. The elevator hasn't worked in 30 years. I leaned forward slowly. The light stayed on. My eyes moved to the camera screens. Camera 3 watched the elevator chamber underground. It was a wide room cut into the rock, with a square metal cage in the center where the lift used to move up and down the shaft. I switched the monitor to full screen. The cage was moving. Not fast, just slowly sliding downward through the open shaft. The old steel cables creaked as the elevator descended. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. That was impossible. The elevator had no power. At least, that's what everyone said. I grabbed the radio. "Control, you seeing this?" A few seconds passed before the voice answered. "Seeing what?" "The elevator," I said. "It just activated." Silence. Then a short laugh. "Not funny." "I'm serious," I said. I kept my eyes on the screen. The cage continued lowering into darkness. "You're telling me the lift just turned itself on?" the man asked. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Another pause. Then I heard typing through the radio. "System logs say it's inactive," he said finally. "Well, the camera says otherwise." The elevator dropped another few feet. The old cables groaned again. My chest tightened. "Maybe someone triggered it underground," the man said. "That's not possible." "Why not?" "Because the elevator is the only way down." The radio stayed quiet. We both understood what that meant. If someone was operating the elevator, they were already inside the mine. And they had been there before my shift started. The cage reached the lower part of the shaft and disappeared from the camera view. Only the dark hole remained in the floor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel light flickered again. Elevator descending. My brow tightened. "Descending," I muttered. The main elevator only served 3 levels. Surface, Level 1, Level 2, but the cage had already passed Level 2. I checked the mine diagram pinned to the wall beside the monitors. The map was old but clear. 3 levels. That was it. No deeper shafts. Still, the elevator kept going. The cables on the camera feed continued sliding downward through the shaft. Slow, steady, like the cage was traveling somewhere below the known mine. My mouth felt dry. "Control," I said into the radio. "Yeah." "The elevator is still descending." "That's not possible." "I'm watching it." Silence again. I could hear the man breathing through the speaker now. "How far?" he asked. "I don't know." The cage was no longer visible, but the cables were still moving, which meant the elevator hadn't reached the bottom yet. And that didn't make sense. Even if the system had somehow restarted, the shaft wasn't that deep. Unless the blueprints were wrong. A slow chill crept into my shoulders. "What if there's another level?" I said quietly. The radio crackled. "There is. That's what the map says." "Because that's the whole mine," he replied. But the elevator cables kept moving. I looked back at the camera feeds. Camera 4 showed the intersection tunnel again. The same place where the figure had been standing earlier. It was empty now. Or at least it looked empty. Still, I had the strange feeling someone was standing just outside the camera's view. Watching. Waiting. I focused back on the elevator panel. The red light flickered once more. Elevator level unknown. My stomach twisted. I had never seen that message before. The elevator had gone somewhere the system couldn't even recognize. Then the cables finally stopped moving. The shaft went silent. For several seconds, nothing happened. I realized I had been holding my breath. I exhaled slowly. "Looks like it stopped," I said into the radio. The man on the other end didn't answer right away. "Listen," he said finally. "I'm calling the supervisor. Just stay in the shack." "Yeah," I said. But my eyes had already drifted back to camera 3. The elevator shaft. Dark. Silent. Waiting. And then the cables moved again. But this time, they were going the other direction. The elevator was coming back up. Slowly, I watched the cables tighten as the lift began its return. My pulse started beating faster. "Control," I whispered. "What?" "It's coming back." The man cursed quietly. "How long was it down there?" "Maybe 2 minutes." "That's impossible." The cables continued rising. Then the cage appeared again at the bottom edge of the camera frame, slowly climbing toward the chamber. I leaned forward. Something inside the cage caught my attention. A shape. At first, I thought it was equipment. But as the elevator moved higher, the shape became clearer. Someone was standing inside the lift. A figure. Tall. Still. Facing the camera. The helmet on its head reflected the dim camera light. Old style. Just like the ones miners used decades ago. The elevator continued rising. The figure didn't move. Didn't shift. Just stood there, staring directly toward the camera. Toward me. My throat tightened. The cage reached the chamber level and stopped with a dull metallic thud. The doors didn't open. The figure remained inside the lift. Completely still. The camera feed flickered slightly. For a moment the image blurred. Then it cleared again. And I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There wasn't just one figure in the elevator. There were 2. The second one stood behind the first, barely visible in the darkness of the cage. Both of them facing the camera. Both of them completely motionless. I felt a strange pressure building in the room, like the mine itself had suddenly become aware of me. The radio crackled again. "What do you see?" the man asked. I stared at the screen. Neither figure moved, but slowly, very slowly. One of them lifted its head and looked directly into the camera lens. Then the elevator doors opened. The first thing that didn't make sense was the time card. I wasn't even looking for it. After the elevator doors opened and the figures stepped out of the cage, the cameras went strange for a few minutes. Static flickered across the screens, and the image kept stuttering like the system couldn't decide what it wanted to show. When the picture finally cleared again, the elevator chamber was empty. Both figures were gone, just dust drifting slowly through the air where they had stood. I kept staring at the monitor for a long time. My hands were resting on the desk, but I noticed they had started to shake slightly. The radio crackled beside me. "Still there?" the voice from control asked. "Yeah." "What happened?" I swallowed and kept my eyes on the screens. "They got out." "Silence." "Who got out?" "The two miners," I said quietly. Another pause. Then the man sighed. "Look, you've been staring at those cameras all night." I know what I saw. "Probably shadows," he said, "or interference." I didn't answer, because something else had caught my attention. The desk drawer. It sat slightly open beside my leg. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe the previous guard left it that way. Or maybe I opened it earlier without thinking. Either way, something inside it was glowing faintly under the desk lamp. A thin plastic folder. Curious, I pulled the drawer open the rest of the way. Inside were old papers. Stacks of faded documents, most of them yellowed with age. Inspection forms. Maintenance logs. And a small metal punch clock with a stack of paper time cards beside it. The kind workers used decades ago, back when miners had to physically clock in and out of their shifts. I picked up the stack and flipped through them. Most of the cards were stamped with dates from the early 1990s. Names I didn't recognize, but one card near the bottom looked older. Much older. The edges were worn and darkened. The name printed at the top caught my eye. Samuel Mercer. Below the name were two stamps. Clock in October 12, 1987, 7:02 a.m. Clock out. I stared at the blank space. There was no exit stamp. No time recorded. Just the empty line. My chest tightened slightly. Maybe the card had been forgotten. Maybe the system malfunctioned. But something about it bothered me enough that I kept reading. A note had been scribbled across the bottom in faded pen. Missing after collapse, presumed deceased. I slowly lowered the card. The collapse. That must have been the accident the supervisor mentioned earlier. The one that shut down the lower tunnels. Samuel Mercer had clocked in that morning and never clocked out. My eyes drifted back to the camera monitors. Camera 1. Entrance tunnel. Empty. Camera 2. Rail corridor. Still empty. Camera 3. Elevator chamber. Quiet. Camera 4. The intersection. My stomach tightened. Someone was standing there again. The same figure. Tall. Thin. Dust covered. And this time, the camera angle was clear enough for me to see more detail. The helmet. The jacket. The slow, heavy way the person stood. Like someone who had been underground too long. I leaned closer to the screen. The helmet had a name scratched into the front. The letters were faint, but I could make them out. Mercer. A strange chill crawled down my arms. I looked down at the time card in my hand. Samuel Mercer. My eyes moved back to the monitor. The figure shifted slightly. Not walking, just adjusting its weight like someone tired after a long shift. The radio crackled again. Still seeing things? The man asked. I ignored him, because something else had appeared on the monitor. Camera 6. The sealed tunnel corridor. At first it looked empty. Then a shape slowly stepped into view. The same figure. Same helmet. Same slow movement. I blinked. That wasn't possible. The intersection camera still showed the figure standing there. But camera 6 showed the same man, walking deeper into the sealed tunnel. Two places at once. I leaned closer to both screens. The figure at the intersection finally moved. It turned slowly toward the left tunnel. Then it began walking. Its steps were slow, heavy, each one stirring small clouds of dust on the floor. I checked camera 2. The rail corridor. Nothing. Camera 3. Elevator chamber. Empty. Then camera 5 flickered. Another tunnel view I hadn't noticed earlier. And there he was again. Samuel Mercer, standing alone in the center of the passage, just staring down the corridor like he was waiting for someone. I felt a strange weight pressing on my chest. The man had died in 1987. His shift ended with the collapse. His body was never recovered. But the cameras kept showing him, still walking the tunnels, still moving through the mine, still working, like the shift never ended. My eyes dropped to the time card again. Clock in 7:02 a.m. Clock out. The empty space suddenly felt wrong. Incomplete. I slowly set the card back on the desk. The monitors flickered again. All 6 camera feeds shifted at the same time. For a moment the screens filled with static. When the images returned, every camera showed the same thing. The same tunnel, the same corridor, and the same figure, standing in the center of the frame, looking directly at the camera. At me. 6 screens. 6 identical views. Samuel Mercer standing in all of them. Perfectly still. Dust drifting around his boots. His head tilted slightly forward like he was studying me. Then slowly, the figure lifted one arm. Not toward the camera, toward the wall beside him. The camera angle adjusted slightly, and I saw what he was pointing at. Another punch clock mounted on the rock wall deep inside the tunnel. Old, rusty, forgotten. Samuel Mercer reached toward it slowly and pressed the lever down. The metallic clack echoed through the security speakers in the shack. I looked back down at the time card on my desk. The blank line at the bottom had changed. Clock out 3:18 a.m. But something about the stamp looked wrong, because the date beside it wasn't 1987 anymore. It was tonight. Locker 17 wasn't supposed to exist. That's the first thing that bothered me. I remember standing in the old locker room with a crowbar in my hand, staring at the rusted metal door like it had just appeared out of nowhere. The renovation crew had been clearing the building for 2 days already. Every locker along the wall had been opened, cataloged, and tagged for removal. Except this one. 17. The number was scratched into the metal instead of painted like the others. And somehow, none of us had noticed it before. I ran my glove across the door. Dust smeared under my fingers. Thick dust, the kind that builds up when something hasn't been touched for years. But that didn't make sense. We had already emptied this whole row yesterday. I remembered it clearly. I had opened locker 14. Tom opened 15. And Jerry had broken the hinge on 16 because it was jammed shut. After that, the wall had ended. Just blank concrete. But now there was another locker sitting there like it had always been part of the room. Locker 17. Behind me, the other guys were working down the hall. Their voices echoed faintly through the empty building. Laughing, arguing about lunch. Normal sounds. But the locker room itself felt strangely quiet. Like the air had thickened. I grabbed the crowbar again and slid the flat end into the seam of the door. The metal groaned as I pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lock snapped open with a dull crack. The door swung outward slowly. A dry smell spilled out. Not rot, not mold, just old air. The kind that sits trapped for decades. Inside the locker, there was only one thing. A folded piece of paper. I frowned. No boots. No helmet. No lunchbox. Just that paper sitting alone on the bottom shelf. I reached in and picked it up. The paper felt stiff and brittle in my gloves. When I unfolded it, small flakes of dust fell to the floor. At first it looked like a child's drawing. Rough lines scratched across the page with pencil. But the longer I stared at it, the more the shapes began to make sense. It was a map. A tunnel map. I recognized the main mine corridor right away. The same layout we had in the official plans. The entrance tunnel. The rail line. The two main excavation levels. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was everything drawn below it. Dozens of additional tunnels. Thin, twisting passages spreading deeper into the rock. Levels that went far beyond anything shown on the official blueprints. My eyes moved slowly across the page. Some of the tunnels were circled. Others were crossed out. And near the bottom of the map, someone had written 3 words in messy handwriting. Do not dig. I felt a small chill crawl up my neck. Hey, Tom's voice echoed from the hallway. You still in there? Yeah, I said. My voice sounded quieter than I expected. I folded the map halfway and stared at the locker again. The inside wall had something scratched into the metal. At first, I thought it was just rust. But when I leaned closer, the letters became clear. A name. Samuel Mercer. Something about the name felt familiar. Like I had heard it somewhere before. Maybe during the safety briefing. Maybe in one of the accident reports. I rubbed the scratch marks with my thumb. The grooves were deep. Whoever carved the name had pressed hard. Like they wanted to make sure it stayed there. Tom stepped into the locker room behind me. You find something good. I turned slightly so he could see the paper. He walked closer. The overhead light flickered softly as he leaned over my shoulder. Looks like a map, he said. It is. He studied the page for a moment. Then he frowned. That's not right. What? He pointed to one of the deeper tunnels on the drawing. This level shouldn't exist. Why not? Because the mine doesn't go that deep. I looked back down at the paper. The tunnel he pointed to curved far below the known levels. Almost like it had been dug in secret. Maybe it's an old plan, I said. Tom shook his head. No way. How do you know? Because the rock down there is unstable. The company sealed that section decades ago. I felt the chill again. Sealed it after what? Tom hesitated. Then he shrugged. After the collapse. The word hung in the room for a moment. I looked at the map again. One tunnel near the bottom had been circled over and over with dark pencil lines. Beside it, someone had written a short note. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, like the person drawing it had been in a hurry or scared. It said, "They're still moving down there." Tom leaned closer. "You see that?" "Yeah, that's messed up." A strange scratching sound echoed softly through the room. Both of us froze. It came from somewhere behind the wall. A slow dragging noise, like metal brushing against stone. Tom looked at me. "You hear that?" I nodded. The sound came again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Not loud, but steady. Almost like someone was pulling something heavy through a narrow tunnel. Tom stepped closer to the wall beside the lockers. "This building sits above the old ventilation shafts," he said quietly. "You think it's the wind?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned down and tapped the concrete with his knuckles. The scratching sound stopped instantly. The room went silent. Tom straightened slowly. "Well," he said, "that's creepy." I forced a small laugh. "Probably just pipes." "Yeah," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. He looked back at the map in my hand. "You should show that to the site manager." "Why?" "Because if those tunnels are real, we might be digging into something the company tried to bury." I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my pocket. "Maybe it's nothing." Tom glanced once more at locker 17. "You ever noticed that locker before?" "No, me neither." He pulled the door closed. The metal clanged softly as it shut. Then he paused. "Wait. What?" Tom ran his finger across the row of lockers beside it. His forehead slowly creased with confusion. There were only 16 lockers here yesterday. I looked down the line. 14, 15, 16, 17. The numbers were scratched into each door. Except one thing suddenly didn't feel right. Locker 17 wasn't at the end anymore. Another locker sat beside it. Rusty, unlabeled, like it had always been there. Tom stared at it. "That wasn't here before." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then slowly, the handle on that new locker began to turn by itself. The map wouldn't leave my mind. All night it sat in my jacket pocket, folded like it was hiding something from me. Every few minutes my hand drifted down to touch it again, just to make sure it was still there. The tunnels drawn on that paper didn't match anything on the official plans. I checked 3 different maps in the site office, and none of them showed the deeper passages. But the drawing looked too detailed to be fake. Every curve, every support beam, every small side tunnel. Someone had spent a long time mapping those places, which meant those tunnels had to exist. The question was why no one talked about them. Morning came slow inside the mine camp. The sky outside the trailer windows was still gray when I finally gave up trying to ignore the map. I pulled it out and spread it across the table. The pencil lines looked even stranger in daylight. Some tunnels were drawn carefully. Others were scratched in quick strokes, like the person making the map had been rushing. And that same note sat near the bottom level. "Do not dig." 3 simple words. But the tunnel beside it had been circled again and again, like the person couldn't stop thinking about it. I grabbed a flashlight and folded the paper again. If the tunnels were real, I wanted to see where they started. The main entrance of the mine looked quiet that morning. The renovation crew hadn't arrived yet, and the equipment yard sat empty. Wind moved slowly through the tall grass around the old buildings. Inside the mine, the air was colder. Damp. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones after a while. My boots echoed softly as I walked down the entrance tunnel. The rail tracks still ran along the center of the floor, disappearing into the darkness ahead. I checked the map again. According to the drawing, the hidden tunnel started somewhere near the old ventilation shafts, about 500 feet in. At first, everything looked normal. Stone walls, support beams, old wiring hanging loose from the ceiling. But the deeper I walked, the more something felt off. It was quiet. Too quiet. Even abandoned mines usually make noise. Dripping water, shifting rock, small echoes from the wind. But here there was almost nothing. Just the sound of my own steps. Eventually, I reached the ventilation area. 3 thick concrete pillars supported the ceiling, and a large metal fan housing sat against the wall. The fan blades were frozen with rust. I pulled out the map again and studied it under the flashlight. The drawing showed a narrow side passage, branching off near this exact spot. But when I looked around, I didn't see anything. Just a flat stone wall. I stepped closer. The flashlight beam moved slowly across the rock surface. At first it looked solid. Then I noticed the line. A thin crack running vertically through the stone. My stomach tightened. The crack was too straight, too clean. I brushed dust away with my glove. Behind the dust, the stone changed color slightly. It wasn't natural rock. It was concrete. Someone had sealed something here. I stepped back and looked again at the map. The hidden tunnel entrance was drawn exactly in this spot, which meant miners had once walked through this wall. But at some point, someone decided to close it. I found a loose metal pipe leaning against the ventilation housing and tapped the concrete. The hollow sound echoed softly through the tunnel. Definitely a cover. The pipe struck the wall again. A small piece of concrete chipped away. Dust drifted down. Behind the broken edge of darkness waited a narrow opening, just big enough for a person to crawl through. A strange feeling ran through me then, like I had just knocked on a door that had stayed closed for a very long time. I crouched down and shined the flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed a small tunnel beyond the wall. It looked older than the main mine. The support beams were rough wood instead of steel, and the floor was covered in thick layers of dust. No fresh footprints, no recent movement, but something about it felt watched. I hesitated. The smart thing would have been to report it. Let the site manager handle it. But curiosity has a strange way of pulling you forward, especially underground. I slipped through the opening and stepped into the hidden tunnel. The air inside felt different. Heavier, stale, like it had been trapped there for decades. My flashlight beam moved slowly across the walls. The wood beams were dark and cracked with age. Some had strange marks scratched into them. At first, I thought they were numbers. Then I realized they were words. Short messages carved with knives. Turn back. Too deep. Not safe. The carvings repeated every few steps, over and over again, almost like warnings left by different miners. I kept walking. The tunnel sloped downward slightly. Dust puffed under my boots with each step. The deeper I went, the thicker the dust became, which meant something important. No one had walked here in a very long time. Then I saw the helmets. 3 of them, sitting on the ground beside the wall. Old mining helmets with cracked headlamps. Their straps were stiff with age. I crouched down and picked one up. Inside the helmet, a name was written in faded marker. Samuel Mercer. My chest tightened. I had seen that name before. On the lacquer. On the map. Now here, deep inside a tunnel that wasn't supposed to exist. I set the helmet back down slowly. The tunnel continued deeper into the darkness ahead. But now the walls had changed. More warnings were carved here. Bigger ones. Longer sentences. One of them stretched across an entire wooden beam. We heard them digging back. I stared at the words. Digging back. From where? The air suddenly felt colder. A soft sound echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. I froze. At first, I thought it was just the mine settling. Rock shifting. But then the sound came again. Scrape. Slow. Metal against stone. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. The sound came from far ahead, somewhere beyond the curve of the tunnel. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Like something heavy being dragged slowly through the rock. I held my breath and listened. For a moment it stopped. The tunnel went silent again. Then something else reached my ears. A faint voice. So quiet I almost thought it was my imagination. But the words became clearer the longer I listened. A tired voice. Deeper. Whispering to itself. The same sentence over and over. Still on shift. My chest tightened, because the voice was slowly getting closer. I still remember the smell, the moment I stepped deeper into that tunnel. Dust so thick it clung to my throat, mixed with the sour tang of old wood and rusting metal. Every step I took kicked up tiny clouds that hung in the flashlight beam, drifting like ghosts. The tunnel had grown narrower, the air heavier, almost sticky. My boots scraped against the uneven floor, the sound amplified, echoing back at me from walls that seemed closer than before. Then I saw them. Marks, thousands of them. Scratched into the wood and stone, row after row, repeating in endless lines. I crouched down, tracing them with my flashlight. Tally marks. 1, 2, 3, 100, 200. Each set separated by longer lines, almost like a pause in counting. I swallowed hard. My mind tried to make sense of it. Why would anyone make so many marks, and for how long? The lines went on for what felt like forever. My light flicked across wall after wall, and still, the tallies never ended. My pulse quickened with every step. Then I noticed something else. Some of the marks were different, deeper, sharper. Almost like someone had carved them in anger or desperation. I reached out and touched one. The groove was cold and rough under my fingers. A shiver ran down my spine. The tunnel twisted ahead, and the tally marks ended abruptly at a dark vertical shaft. I froze. It looked like a ladder had once gone down it, but the rungs were missing. The shaft disappeared into the darkness, a black hole in the side of the tunnel. The air around it was colder, not just the usual mine chill. This felt alive, pressing against my skin like a hand. I took a hesitant step closer. Then I saw the scratches at the edge of the shaft. They weren't tally marks. They were letters, faint, jagged, almost carved by fingernails. Do not go down. My flashlight flickered. I steadied it, blinking. The walls seemed to sway in the dim light. Dust motes drifted in unnatural patterns. My heartbeat filled my ears. I wanted to leave, turn back, tell myself it was enough. But something drew me forward, something deeper than curiosity. I traced the wall alongside the shaft, following the tally marks backward. That's when I noticed irregularities. Some rows weren't uniform. They leaned toward the shaft as if pointing, guiding me. Someone or something had counted and then stopped, leaving a trail that led here. The air smelled metallic, blood, rust. I couldn't tell, but every inhale left a metallic taste on my tongue. I crouched, running my fingers over the last few dozen marks. They were fresher than the others, the grooves sharper. The older scratches crumbled under my touch, but these felt alive. Then I heard it. Not a voice, Not words, just a soft scraping like nails across wood, somewhere below the shaft, slow, patient, waiting. I swallowed, gripping my flashlight tighter. My mind raced. Could it be another worker, lost, trapped in these hidden tunnels for decades? But the shaft was too narrow. No one could climb down without a ladder, and the ladder was gone. I took another step closer, peering into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught something at the edge, a shape, shifting just enough to make me step back. Heart hammering, I shone the light down the shaft. Nothing, only darkness. And yet I could feel it. Something was there, something waiting. My legs trembled, but I couldn't tear myself away. Something about the tally marks, about the shaft, demanded I keep looking. I ran my hand along the wall again, following the lines upward and downward, trying to see if I missed anything. That's when I saw it. A second set of marks, smaller, almost hidden in the shadows. They weren't like the others, less organized, haphazard, desperate. And they led not to the shaft, but toward a small alcove behind a fallen beam. I crouched, brushing away dust and debris. There, carved faintly in the stone floor, were more letters. "They know your name." A cold knot formed in my stomach. My mind refused to connect the thought, but my gut whispered the truth. Someone or something had been keeping count, watching, waiting. The tunnel seemed to shift around me. Every shadow elongated. Every sound echoed strangely. My flashlight illuminated shapes that weren't there a moment ago. The tally marks almost seemed to twitch when I looked away, like they were alive. I stepped back from the shaft, trying to calm my racing heart, but the silence behind me pressed down. A single echo bounced off the walls, soft, deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape. It was coming from the alcove. I swallowed hard, forcing myself forward, shining the light into the darkness. The alcove was empty, dust swirling in the beam, but the feeling didn't leave. I could almost sense it watching me, counting me. A new set of tally marks appeared along the floor, leading deeper into the tunnel, beyond the alcove where the walls narrowed and the air grew thick. I hadn't noticed them before. They were fresher, almost recent. I knelt, tracing them with my fingers. The scratches ended abruptly, but the last mark was different. Not a tally, not a letter. A handprint. Small, human, wet. I stumbled backward, heart racing, nearly dropping the flashlight. My breath came fast. I couldn't explain it. The print was too fresh, but I was alone. No one had come down here. And yet I knew someone, or something had. I forced myself to calm down, to think. There had to be a logical explanation. A worker, a prank, a trap left behind. I took a deep breath and tried to shine the light back toward the shaft. That's when I noticed the shadows. Not my own, not from the beam. Shadows moving against the walls, slowly, purposefully. I froze. The tally marks had stopped at the shaft, but the air above it, it shimmered, like heat over a flame, or like the tunnel itself was breathing. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. Somewhere inside the shaft or behind it, my chest tightened, my hands shook. I wanted to leave, turn back, forget everything, but curiosity clawed at me. The tally marks, the hidden shaft, the handprint, someone or something was here and it had been waiting. I took another step toward the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow, a figure not fully formed, not human but counting, always counting. The air pressed against my chest. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting long, trembling beams across the carved marks. Every tally, every letter, every warning, they were for me. And the shaft, it was calling. I had to know what was down there. I had to. Even as the tunnel whispered, even as the shadows pressed closer, I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. The tally marks ended here. But something told me the real counting hadn't begun. I drove through the desert until the sun was low, a burning smear against the horizon, and that's when I saw it. A town, Not a village, not a cluster of buildings, but a proper town, streets laid out in neat lines, saloons and general stores, all standing silent under the fading light. And yet no smoke from chimneys, no dust kicked up by horses or cars, just stillness. The first thing I noticed was the wind. Not a breeze, but a sigh that rolled across the streets, rattling shutters and tossing scraps of paper along cracked sidewalks. I parked on Main Street, feeling the heat of the asphalt under my boots, and for a moment I thought I might be the first living thing here in decades. Buildings leaned like they were waiting for someone to notice them. Windows dark and blank, doors closed tight as if the town had been sealed on purpose. I walked slowly, each step echoing like a gunshot in the emptiness. I passed a bakery, shelves still lined with flour and jars, but every surface was layered in dust. A rocking chair on a porch swayed lightly, though the air felt still. My stomach tightened. Signs told a story I couldn't ignore. Welcome to Silver Creek, population 1,230. Yet no one remained, not a soul, not even an animal, just the hollow echo of my own breathing. I moved toward the center of town, past the old general store and the blacksmith's shop. Doors hung open on rusted hinges. I could see the counter inside, ledgers still stacked in neat rows. A calendar on the wall was frozen at July 3, 1927. My pulse quickened. Why would everyone leave overnight? I found the mine at the edge of town. The entrance yawned wide, black against the sun's dying glow. A single rail track ran from the mouth of the tunnel into the distance. I imagined miners hauling carts of silver down those tracks, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off the walls. And then I remembered the stories, how the mine had shut suddenly, almost violently, leaving everything behind. The air around the mine smelled different, colder. Even under the desert heat, a shadow seemed to linger there. I stepped closer, feeling the rough stone beneath my hands. Something about the entrance made the hair on my neck rise. I reached out to touch the rails. Rust crunched beneath my fingers, and then I noticed the tracks ahead. Not all of them were rusted. One section gleamed as if polished recently, despite decades of neglect. My heart thumped, slow and deliberate. How could that be? I looked back toward the town. The streets were still, but I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a figure stepping out from an alley, only to vanish when I turned. My throat went dry. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow shifting in the dying sun. The main saloon stood at the center of town. Its swinging doors hung crooked, creaking as I pushed them open. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the last light. I stepped inside, the wood groaning beneath my weight. Tables were overturned, glasses shattered on the floor. And yet footprints, fresh, not mine. They led to the back door. I froze. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and sweat, like someone had just been here. Impossible. I spun around, scanning every corner. Nothing moved. Yet the footprints were clear. A trail from the center of the saloon to the open doorway, pressed into the dust as if someone, or something, had walked carefully, leaving no other trace. My flashlight buzzed in my hand as I shone it toward the doorway. The desert outside was empty. No footprints in the sand, no wind stirring the tumbleweeds. Just the fading light and the long shadows stretching across the street. I swallowed and walked toward the mine. Something drew me there. Not curiosity, not adventure, something darker, more insistent. Inside the mine, the tunnel opened to darkness. My flashlight cut a narrow path ahead. The walls were slick, streaked with mineral deposits that shimmered like wet stone. I could hear the faint drip of water echoing through the tunnels. My own footsteps sounded loud and clumsy. Then I saw it, a lantern hanging from a beam, unlit, but polished, almost new, not like it had been sitting in the darkness for decades. I reached out to touch it, feeling the warmth beneath the metal. My hand trembled. How could this exist here, untouched by time? I moved deeper. The mine widened into a cavern, beams rotting in some places, supporting walls slick with moisture. And then I heard it, a low hum, almost like someone whispering, just at the edge of hearing. I froze, my breath catching. The whispering stopped when I strained to listen. Only the drip of water, the echo of my boots. I told myself it was my imagination, the desert heat playing tricks on my mind. But then I noticed the walls, marks, etched into the stone, faint lines that looked almost like letters. I crouched closer, brushing away dust. The marks were names, dates, numbers, all ending abruptly at the edge of a shaft that wasn't on any map I had seen. A cold draft rose from it, brushing my face. The smell hit me, earth, damp, and something else. Something foul, metallic. My heart raced, pulse hammering. Whoever had been here last, they hadn't left. Not entirely. I glanced back at the town through the mine entrance. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the streets. The wind moaned softly, carrying what sounded like faint laughter or crying. I couldn't tell which. I forced myself to keep moving. The mind demanded it. Each step forward pressed against my chest. The whispers came again, soft now, like someone murmuring my name. My name. I spun around, nothing. The shaft loomed ahead, black and endless. The markings led straight to it, tallies scratched into the stone as if counting something, days, hours, breaths, or victims. I stepped closer. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my skin. I wanted to leave, to turn back and never speak of this place. But my feet moved forward anyway, drawn by the tally marks, by the whispers, by the mine itself. A flicker of movement at the edge of the shaft caught my eye. A shadow that didn't belong, shifting in ways that made my stomach churn. The darkness seemed to pulse, as if alive. I swallowed hard. My flashlight trembled in my hand, cutting through the blackness in shaky beams. I realized then that the town outside, the abandoned streets, the empty houses, they were just the beginning. The real emptiness, the real danger was below. The tally marks ended at the edge of the shaft, but I knew somehow they were waiting, counting, watching. I took a step closer, and I felt it, not with my eyes but in my chest, a presence, patient and silent, waiting in the shadows where the mine went deeper than any map, any memory, any human should ever go. I had arrived in Silver Creek, expecting nothing but dust and silence. What I hadn't expected was that it had never truly been empty. I found the diary in the old church, tucked behind a loose brick in the wall where sunlight barely reached. The cover was cracked, leather stiff from age, and the pages smelled of smoke and mold. I flipped it open, and the handwriting inside was tiny, precise, like the writer had wanted to squeeze every thought into the margins. The first entry was simple, dates, names, and the usual complaints about long shifts and cold tunnels. But one paragraph caught me. It mentioned a shaft beneath the church, a level no one was supposed to know existed. The miners had discovered something down there, something they never named, only whispered about in fear. I walked outside, the desert wind rattling the church doors. The sun had set, and shadows stretched across the cracked roof like black fingers. I followed the diary's directions, which led me to a trapdoor hidden under the altar, worn wood disguised by dust and prayer mats. My heart hammered as I lifted it. The air that came up smelled old, like wet stone and decay. The ladder descended into darkness. I hesitated at the edge, flashlight in hand, listening. The diary warned of sounds down there, echoes of metal on stone, whispers too soft to understand. I told myself it was superstition, a way for scared miners to make sense of the emptiness. Step by step, I climbed down. The walls were rough, jagged, slick with years of neglect. My boots scuffed against stone, sending tiny echoes bouncing through the shaft. Halfway down, the ladder ended and I landed on the cavern floor. The space opened wider than I expected, like a room that had been carved but never finished. Scattered tools lay around, pickaxes, helmets, rusted carts. Some were fresh, as if someone had used them recently. My pulse raced. Who else could be down here? The diary had warned the miners never to linger. They had fled this level, leaving the air thick with fear. I explored slowly, moving toward a faint light at the far end. Shadows shifted across the walls, painted by my flashlight. Marks scratched into the stone caught my eye, names, dates, strange symbols none of the miners could have left. The diary had hinted at these markings, something they saw but couldn't explain. A sudden breeze stirred, cold and sharp, brushing against my neck. I spun, flashlight trembling in my grip. Nothing. But I heard it again, a whisper, soft and distant, coming from deeper in the shaft. My stomach twisted. The diary had warned of voices, but I never expected them to feel so alive. I pressed on, heart pounding. The shaft sloped downward into a tunnel that wasn't on any map. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming small pools on the uneven floor. The smell changed. Wet stone gave way to something metallic, like blood or rusted iron. I wanted to turn back, but the diary's words kept me moving. Once you see it, you can never forget. At the end of the tunnel, I found a hole, a vertical shaft descending into darkness that seemed endless. The walls were slick, and the markings ended abruptly here. I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing from below, patient and silent. I knelt and shone my light down the shaft. The blackness stared back, absorbing the beam. I thought I saw movement, something slipping into the shadows, too quick to track but undeniably there. My breath caught. I stepped back, trying to make sense of it. The diary had been clear. Miners never returned from this level. Those who entered the shaft beneath the church were never seen again. I could feel the history of fear clinging to the walls, thick and suffocating. A noise echoed behind me, a clatter like falling stone. My flashlight swung wildly. The air was still again, but I could feel it, something waiting, patient, deeper in the darkness. I forced myself to focus, tracing the markings on the walls. They formed a pattern leading toward the shaft, counting days, hours, or perhaps something else entirely. The diary's last entries were frantic, letters slanting and messy. They mentioned a presence, something the miners could hear and feel but never see. They had scrawled warnings, crossed out names, and final notes that ended mid-sentence. I shivered. Whoever, or whatever, was down here had left its mark, silent and watching. I knew I should leave. My fingers itched to climb back up, to shut the trapdoor and never return. But curiosity gnawed at me. The diary had opened a door I could not close, and the shaft beneath the church whispered promises I could not ignore. The light at the far end flickered again, faint and intermittent like a pulse. I approached cautiously. My flashlight caught shapes, tools, carts, and then something else, something small and still. It looked human, hunched in the corner, too dark to make out clearly. I froze. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. The diary had said the miners avoided this level for a reason. Now I understood. There was something here, waiting, patient, just as the words had warned. I took a step closer and the figure vanished, not with movement but as if swallowed by the darkness itself. My stomach lurched. The shaft seemed to pulse with life, walls breathing, the air thickening around me. I whispered to myself, trying to anchor my mind. It was empty. It had to be empty. Yet the whispers persisted, soft and insistent, calling from the depths of the shaft, drawing me closer. I looked back toward the ladder. It seemed farther than before, distorted by shadows. The church above was distant, almost unreal, as if this level existed apart from the world I knew. And then I noticed the markings again. They weren't random. They spiraled, descending into the shaft, counting something I could not name. Days, hours, lives. The diary had warned of this, but I hadn't believed it could feel so immediate, so alive. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight. I had to make a choice. Step into the shaft, follow the markings into the unknown, or retreat and risk never knowing what lay beneath the church. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, almost intelligible. They called my name. My skin crawled. I realized then that the diary hadn't warned me fully. The miners hadn't just feared this place. They had known it, watched, waited, counted. I took one final step toward the shaft. The air pressed in, thick with anticipation, and the shadows shifted around me, alive and patient. I could feel it watching from the darkness. waiting for me to move, to commit, to see what the miners had seen and never returned from. The diary trembled in my pocket. Its words seemed alive now, whispering, guiding, insisting. The shaft beneath the church was no longer just a hidden passage. It was a presence, a history, a warning that I could neither ignore nor fully understand. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that whatever lay below had been waiting for someone to follow those markings for decades. I swallowed again and stepped forward. The darkness claimed me, and the church above waited, silent, patient, eternal. The sirens started just after midnight. I wasn't expecting them, not really. Only old stories, yellowed newspaper clippings, and whispered warnings in the town museum. But when the wail hit, it cut through the night like a knife, rattling the windows, vibrating in my chest. It didn't sound mechanical. It was alive, long and moaning, and it carried over the canyon in a way that made my skin crawl. I stayed in my car at the edge of the mine, headlights dim, watching the old shaft entrances shiver in the wind. The diary I'd found the week before had hinted at this night. The night miners sealed the tunnels with explosives decades ago, but it hadn't prepared me for the sound itself. That unearthly scream pressed at my thoughts, clawing at every rational explanation I tried to cling to. The map in the diary marked several tunnels that didn't exist on any modern plan. One of them led below the oldest shaft, the one rumored to have collapsed after a small explosion. Locals called it the Dead Vein. The sirens, I realized, had started there. The thought made my stomach twist. What had the miners tried to warn about? And why had the sound lingered for hours, long after the blasting should have ended? I stepped out of the car, boots crunching on the gravel, flashlight slicing through the darkness. The wind was sharp, pulling at my jacket and hair, but it wasn't just wind. There was a rhythm to it, almost like the sirens themselves were breathing through the canyon, and every gust carried a faint metallic scent, like gunpowder mixed with wet stone. The first tunnel was blocked, braced with rotting timber, but the siren's moan pressed me forward. I ducked under a fallen beam and followed the faint echo deeper. My light caught marks on the walls, scratches that weren't there before, or perhaps I hadn't noticed. They were in sequences, long chains of tally marks, counting something I couldn't understand. Days, hours, lives. Each mark felt urgent, as though whoever made them had been recording time in terror. A sudden pop of loose stone made me freeze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself it was just the mind settling. But then I heard it again, a soft, hollow echo, not of rock, but something moving beneath, something alive, or maybe something that had once been alive and refused to leave. The sirens had stopped in the distance, leaving silence thick as fog. I realized my own breathing was loud, uneven, like I'd been running without moving. The diary had warned the miners never to linger. They had fled the sealed tunnels, some claiming the sirens weren't mechanical at all, but something else, something that roamed when the walls shook. I moved cautiously down the old shaft. My flashlight caught shadows flickering in corners, shapes I couldn't name. Some seemed human-sized, hunched against the wall, but every time I blinked or shifted the light, they were gone. My stomach knotted. The diary's words resurfaced in my mind. The siren's call to those who listen too long. I found a side passage, narrower than the main tunnel, and the air changed immediately. It was colder, damp, and tight, like the mine itself was holding its breath. Marks lined these walls too, deeper and more frantic than the others. I could almost feel the desperation of whoever had been here. They had worked by candlelight, recording some unseen horror, counting something that had terrified them into silence. Then I heard it, a faint scratching from further down the shaft. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it. The marks ended abruptly at a low arch of stone. Beyond it, the tunnel sloped downward into a darkness that seemed liquid, heavy, and swallowing. I swallowed hard. The diary had hinted that some tunnels were never fully mapped because the miners couldn't explain what they found. Another sound echoed and my stomach dropped. It wasn't the sirens, not exactly, but a low hum, vibrating in rhythm with my heartbeat. I realized the sirens had never been outside. They had been inside all along, something trapped beneath the mine, pulsing through stone and air until the surface trembled. I crouched near a rusted cart trying to quiet my racing mind. The air was thick, almost wet, and I could smell smoke and iron. There was movement at the edge of my light, too fast, too smooth for a person. My flashlight caught a glimpse of a figure hunched, almost crouching on all fours, then gone before I could focus. My breath came in short bursts. The diary's last entries described the night of the sirens in fragments, letters slanting and messy. Miners wrote of a presence, of shadows that moved with the sound, of screams not human, and of the frantic work of sealing tunnels with explosives. One passage stood out. We tried to trap it, but it waits. It always waits. If you hear the sirens, you know where it sleeps. A cold wind swept through the passage, carrying the faintest echo of a moan. I realized I was standing directly above the sealed shaft. The one the diary marked with an X. The air felt alive, pressing down, holding me in place, warning me, daring me to step closer. I edged forward, flashlight trembling in hand. The walls were slick, and I could see more tally marks etched into the stone, deeper and wider here, as if the ones who made them had tried to count something that never ended. And then I saw the shadow again, standing at the far end, still, just at the edge of visibility. Human-shaped, but impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch and bend where they shouldn't. My chest tightened. The diary had said the miners didn't survive the sealing of the tunnels, but it hadn't said how many had vanished before the explosions. And now I wondered, were those who vanished still down here, lingering in the shadows, drawn to the sirens like moths to a flame? I wanted to leave. My boots felt glued to the stone floor. But curiosity, that stubborn, dangerous thing, pushed me forward. I traced the tally marks, counting silently. They spiraled toward the sealed shaft, as though marking every second that passed, every heartbeat, every life claimed. Then the sirens started again, faint this time, a low wail that vibrated through the walls and into my chest. I froze. The shadow moved just slightly, leaning toward me, stretching longer in the dim light. I stepped back, heart racing. The tunnel seemed to pulse, as if aware of my presence, aware I had listened. And then I understood. The sirens weren't warnings. They weren't alarms. They were a call, a record of something trapped and patient, marking time and watching for anyone who came too close. I glanced at the sealed shaft. The marks ended there, but the sense of counting continued, echoing in my mind, a rhythm I couldn't escape. And I realized the miners hadn't just tried to seal a tunnel, they had tried to trap whatever called with the sirens. A gust of air swept past, carrying a whisper I thought I understood. You hear us now. I took a step back, realizing the diary had only given me half the story. The sirens weren't history. They were alive still, and whatever had howled that night waited just beneath the stone, patient, counting, and maybe hungry for the next listener. The shadows at the far end shifted again, and the tally marks seemed to move with them, stretching toward me, pulling me closer. My flashlight flickered, and for the first time, I wondered if I had already gone too far. And yet I couldn't leave. The sirens had promised answers, and now, standing above the sealed shaft, I knew I had to follow. I stepped forward into the dark pulse of the mine, and the echoes of the night sirens surrounded me, insistent, eternal. The shadows watched, and the counting never stopped. The walls of the collapsed mine weren't just rock. They were silence pressed into jagged shapes. Every step I took cracked gravel under my boots, echoing against walls that seemed too vast to be inside any man-made shaft. I knew the blueprints. I had studied them. Nothing in those plans suggested a cavern this big, not even close. And yet, here I was, standing at the mouth of something enormous, a hollow space that swallowed the weak light of my flashlight in greedy darkness. I could feel it before I saw it. The air shifted, heavier somehow, carrying a damp sweetness that reminded me of old stone and something rotting, something long buried. The diary I'd found in the old miner's office whispered in my mind. They sealed it for a reason. They tried to forget it. Some things are too wide, too deep, too hungry to be named. I edged forward, boots scraping the loose gravel, flashlight flicking over the walls. They were scored with deep striations, some deliberate, others chaotic, like teeth had scraped through rock. I could almost hear the echoes of hammers and picks, miners working furiously decades ago, driven by fear they couldn't put into words. Then I noticed the first symbol, carved, not scratched, a triangle inside a circle repeated along the wall in uneven rows. Each one was bigger than a man's hand, each one darker at the edges, as though the stone itself had absorbed something from the markings. I crouched to examine them. There was a sticky residue, faint and metallic. Blood, rust, I couldn't tell. My light caught a fissure leading deeper into the cavern, a chasm so wide it swallowed all sense of distance. I leaned over the edge and felt the vertigo hit me in waves. The darkness below wasn't just absence, it was a weight. My stomach churned at the thought of falling, but something else pressed against my curiosity, sharp and insistent. Something wanted to be found. I moved along the rim, careful not to let my light fall into the black pit, and that's when I saw them. Bones, dozens of them piled like they'd been dumped. Not human alone, some were larger, twisted at impossible angles. The shadows stretched them in ways my mind rejected. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The miners hadn't just sealed the tunnel. They tried to bury it. Whatever it was, they hadn't wanted anyone to see. A gust of wind, or maybe a whisper, rippled through the cavern. Dust stirred, falling in tiny clouds that caught in the beam of my flashlight. I blinked and suddenly felt I wasn't alone. I wasn't supposed to be. The walls seemed to breathe with the memory of the miners, a pulse beneath the rock that matched my own heartbeat. I descended slowly into the hollow, hands brushing against slick stone, feet finding purchase on jagged ledges. Every step revealed more. Symbols carved into walls, deep hollows that could hide a man, footprints pressed into dust that should have settled decades ago. But most disturbing were the impressions in the floor, wide and oval, as if something massive had walked here recently or had never truly left. I paused near a mound of debris and noticed the first open tunnel. Unlike the main shaft, this one was irregular, jagged, and uncharted. It led deeper, spiraling into darkness that felt alive. I could feel it moving, not air or wind, but something that rippled like a living shadow, brushing the edges of my mind. The diary's final pages flashed in memory. They tried to bury it with stone. They failed. Some things cannot be silenced, cannot be caged. It waits for the fool who digs too deep. I clenched my jaw, pushing past the fear curling like smoke through my chest. I had to see. I had to know. I followed the tunnel, flashlight swaying as loose rock rattled beneath my boots. Faint sounds emerged from the cavern floor, like breathing, or wind pressed through a cave so deep it became a living thing. I froze, convinced it was the echo of my own heartbeat, but the sound didn't match me. It was slow, methodical, patient. Then I saw it, a shape low and crouched against the far wall. I could barely make it out, but it wasn't human. Not exactly. Limbs too long, proportions wrong, head tilted at a sharp angle. It froze when it noticed me, perfectly still, and I realized my flashlight had caught the eyes, glowing faintly in the reflection off the stone. I stumbled back, heart racing, but it didn't move. It just watched. A low rumble shivered through the cavern, loose rocks falling in small avalanches. I thought the ceiling might collapse. I thought about turning back, but the shape shifted, flowing toward the darker side of the cavern, moving with a deliberate slowness that felt like it was leading me somewhere. My curiosity, my foolishness, pushed me forward. The walls here were different, smoother, carved not by tools but by something enormous, something that didn't belong to men. I traced a finger along the stone, feeling depressions that hinted at movement, like the creature had pressed against the rock and left traces of itself. I could smell it then, faintly, an odor that reminded me of decay and iron, but strangely sweet, like copper in warm water. I noticed the piles of debris again, stones that seemed deliberately stacked as if to hide something beneath. I crouched and lifted a few, revealing bones, broken and unnaturally long. I froze. One of them was shaped in a way no human body could be. I swallowed hard and my flashlight flickered. The creature, or whatever had left the bones, moved closer. I could hear a faint scraping along the cavern floor, a rhythm that wasn't my own. My pulse accelerated. I wanted to scream, but the sound would have carried, and I wasn't sure what was listening. Then I found the largest opening of all, a vertical shaft leading down into an abyss. The edges were polished smooth, like something had slid down countless times, and at the lip of the shaft I could see faint markings, symbols similar to the ones carved along the cavern walls, but larger, older, darker, as if whatever had carved them wanted me to know. Do not descend. I leaned closer, peering into the black. A gust of air rose from below, carrying whispers that brushed against my ears, words I couldn't make sense of but understood as warning. My stomach churned, but my mind raced with the question. Had the miners really sealed this to protect the world above, or to contain something that should never see daylight again? The low hum from the depths shifted, growing stronger, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I realized then the cavern wasn't just hollow, it was alive, resonating with the memory of every creature that had passed through, every miner that had sealed the tunnels, every secret buried beneath stone. I backed away from the shaft, shivering, but couldn't leave. Something deep in the darkness stirred, as though sensing my hesitation, and I understood. It had been waiting for someone to return, someone to witness what they tried to bury. I turned slowly, tracing my steps back along the debris-strewn floor, but the shape moved silently alongside me, always just at the edge of the flashlight's glow. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. I didn't dare look directly at it. And yet, every instinct screamed that this creature, or presence, was the reason the miners had never returned, the reason the company had abandoned the site without explanation. I paused near the cavern's edge, watching the faint shimmer of light from above. I thought about turning back to the surface, escaping this echoing tomb, but the vertical shaft called to me, black and immense. My curiosity twisted with dread. What had they tried to bury, and why had it never stayed hidden? The creature shifted again, silent, patient, a shadow without form. I knew one thing with certainty: whatever waited in the depths wasn't sleeping. It had been sealed, yes, but it had been waiting, and now it had me. I took a step closer to the shaft, drawn by questions I wasn't meant to ask, my flashlight catching the edges of symbols carved deep into the stone. The hollow beneath the collapsed mine pulsed with some ancient rhythm, some intelligence older than the blueprints, older than the miners themselves. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, and realized that whatever had been buried here, whatever the miners tried to lock away, it had never wanted to be forgotten. And I was standing in the middle of its memory. The shadow watched, and the hollow waited. The first time I set foot on that mountain, I could feel it watching. The wind whipped across the ridges, carrying dust and the smell of iron, and the abandoned mine yawned like a wound in the rock. My boots crunched against loose gravel, each step echoing louder than it should, like the mountain itself was trying to make me stop. The demolition crew wasn't here yet, but the survey team had orders: map the tunnels, take core samples, report anything unusual. The mine's entrance was half collapsed, wooden beams splintered and blackened with age. I squinted into the darkness and felt my stomach tighten. There was nothing alive here, no animals, no birds, not even the scuttling of insects. But the air felt thick, dense, heavy, almost humid despite the cold. Something had been left behind, or maybe it had never left at all. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam trembling in my hand. The walls inside were pitted with old drill marks, rust stains, and the faint etchings of letters and numbers, miners, shorthand maybe, or warnings I couldn't read. The tunnel smelled of damp stone, of metal that had long ago stopped yielding anything valuable, and underneath it all, a faint trace of something else, something coppery and sweet. I moved deeper, letting the others spread out behind me. Each step was a negotiation with the shadows. Loose rocks clattered to the floor and the sound bounced, multiplied, making it impossible to judge distance. I could feel the history pressing in, the miners who had vanished, the tools left behind like ghosts. My eyes caught the first anomaly. A wall had been patched with fresh rock, different from the rest. It looked like someone had tried to seal it off, but poorly. The edges were jagged, rough, and the plaster was cracking in long lines that reminded me of veins. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement behind it. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. We set up the equipment, drilling into the stone to take samples. The first core came out dark, blacker than the surrounding rock, almost oily in texture. I frowned, lifting it to the light. It smelled of something burnt, almost like charred meat. The geologist in the team frowned too, muttering about unusual mineral content. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than minerals. As we moved deeper, I noticed markings along the walls. Not the typical scratches of miners, but intentional, deliberate patterns. Triangles, circles, lines carved deep into the rock. The further we went, the more numerous they became, until they covered the walls in a chaotic grid. My skin prickled. The others were focused on their instruments, oblivious. I had the sense that we were intruding on something old, something the mountain hadn't forgiven. Then I heard it, a low hum like distant machinery, but rhythmic, almost deliberate. The others didn't notice. I froze, listening. The sound grew faintly louder with each step I took forward. My pulse hammered, and I realized the hum wasn't echoing from the entrance. It came from deeper within the mine. Something moved there, just beyond the reach of my light. I reached a junction where the main tunnel forked into narrower shafts. One of them was bricked up, the bricks blackened and old but fresh in places, like a patch someone had reinforced. I ran my fingers over the surface. Faint scratches marred the brickwork as if nails had clawed at it from the inside. A chill ran through me. Why would a mine this old need a reinforced wall here? What had been sealed? The team called out from behind, asking me to check the next section. I forced myself to turn back, the hum still thrumming faintly in my ears. The corridor was tight, claustrophobic, the walls pressing in as I moved. Then I noticed the footprints. Not mine, not any of ours. Small, irregular, too spaced to be human. I froze, scanning the shadows, my flashlight catching the glint of something metallic ahead. It was a tool, old, rusted, partially buried in dust, but it didn't belong to us. It had been dropped carefully, almost ceremoniously. I bent down, picking it up. The handle was smooth, worn, and strangely warm, like it had just been held. My mind raced. Was someone here, or something? The hum pulsed again, and I realized it was no longer distant. It was around me, surrounding me, vibrating through the floor. My breath hitched. I told myself to stay calm, logical. Surveyors do this all the time. Mines collapse, strange sounds happen. But the shadows in the tunnel felt alive, moving slightly as I passed. I called out, and my voice bounced back in distorted echoes. The sound seemed to linger longer than it should, like the tunnel was holding onto it. I shivered, realizing this mine wasn't just abandoned. It was aware, watching, waiting. The team caught up to me, their lights casting long, jittery beams. They laughed nervously, joking about the acoustics. I forced a smile, but my gut twisted. The markings along the walls now seemed intentional, a warning carved for anyone who dared explore too deep. I traced one with my finger, a triangle inside a circle. My skin tingled. The symbol radiated something, a subtle pull that made my stomach knot. We pressed on, and the tunnel narrowed. I brushed against the walls, feeling rough stone, cold sweat, and something else. A faint, sticky residue that clung to my fingers. I smelled it, metallic, sharp, blood. I shook my head, trying to rationalize. Miners had accidents, old tools rusted. But a deeper fear sank in. The mine hadn't been abandoned because it was empty. It had been abandoned because it had chosen to be. Then we found the shaft. Vertical, black, impossibly deep. The echo from below rolled up in waves, carrying a hollow, whispering sound. I shone my flashlight down and saw nothing but blackness that seemed to breathe. A draft rose, cold and wet, carrying the same sweet iron scent that had been following me. My stomach churned. We were at the heart of the mountain now, where it had kept its secrets. One of the team pointed out a ladder bolted into the side of the shaft. It looked old, frayed, but intact. I didn't want to climb it. Every instinct screamed that descending would be a mistake. And yet, curiosity, that insistent, stupid human need to see, pulled me forward. I took a single step onto the ladder, feeling the rungs sway under my weight. The hum intensified, resonating in my chest. I glanced at the walls. Symbols covered them in spirals and grids, more complex than anything I had seen before. They weren't just markings. They were a language, a record, a warning. The air shifted. I felt it before I saw it, a movement in the shadows at the edge of my light. Something crouched low, watching, waiting. I froze. My breath echoed in the shaft, mingling with the hum. I knew then that the mine had not been abandoned. It had been sealed. The shaft, the symbols, the bricked walls, they weren't mistakes. They were precautions against what I didn't know. I told the team we should retreat, but my voice sounded thin, wavering. The shadows seemed to pulse, stretching along the walls as if the darkness itself was alive. The ladder creaked under my weight, threatening to give way. I swallowed hard, gripping the rungs. The hum was deafening now, surrounding me, vibrating through my bones. I looked up briefly, saw the dim light of the entrance far above, and realized something horrifying. Whatever had been down here, whatever the miners had tried to bury or avoid, was still here, patient, waiting, and I had stepped into its domain. I didn't want to descend any further. I didn't want to explore the shaft, but something, a force I couldn't name, pulled at my curiosity, whispered promises in the hum, urging me down. And I knew the mountain was watching me, testing me, deciding if I was worth letting see what it had kept hidden for decades. I took a deep breath, heart pounding. One more step down, one rung. And I couldn't stop myself. I could feel it the moment we stepped into that corridor. The air changed, thicker, almost damp with something that wasn't quite water. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but the beam reflected off walls so unnaturally smooth it was like staring into polished steel. No chisel marks, no cracks, nothing that suggested this was part of the mountain. And yet it was there, carved through solid rock. Whoever or whatever made it didn't leave a single mistake. The others were busy checking their instruments, murmuring about seismic readings and mineral densities. I couldn't focus on any of that. My gut told me this tunnel had a purpose, a reason beyond geology. I reached out, my fingers brushing the wall, cold, hard, impenetrable, and just faintly humming, almost imperceptibly. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. The floor was just as smooth, the dust almost swept away, as if someone had been here recently. I bent down and picked up a tiny fragment of stone. It was pure, crystalline, nothing like the jagged rock outside. I felt a prickle of unease. This was not natural. I glanced at my team. They were all absorbed in their instruments, oblivious to the corridor itself. One of them muttered about temperature anomalies. I pointed to the walls, but no one looked. The hum grew slightly louder, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I had a sudden, irrational certainty that the corridor was alive, watching. We walked deeper. The tunnel curved slightly, vanishing into a black nothing. I noticed faint markings on the walls. Not scratches, not carvings, just subtle indentations that formed patterns too regular to be random. Triangles, circles, lines intersecting. Something ancient, something deliberate. I traced one with my fingertip. My skin crawled. The wall seemed warmer under my touch. A draft rose, carrying a scent that shouldn't be here. Metal or blood? My stomach nodded. I told myself it was just the mine, old tunnels mixing with newer ones, underground rivers. But the smell persisted, clinging to the back of my throat. We reached a point where the tunnel narrowed. I instinctively slowed, my light sweeping the curve. That's when I noticed the shadows. They weren't moving like normal shadows, not cast by our lights. They flickered at the edges, stretching and twisting as if the darkness itself had shape and intent. My pulse quickened. I told myself to stay calm, rational. Survey work demands calm. The floor tilted slightly, a gentle slope downward. And at the base of the slope, a narrow shaft cut into the wall, perfectly round. smooth. Again, nothing natural. I crouched, shining my light down. It disappeared into blackness. I could feel a hum emanating from it, stronger this time, resonating inside my chest. Something lived down there, or something had been buried. One of the team called my name. I turned, but the words felt distant, as if filtered through water. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief stutter of light I saw it, a faint figure, or the suggestion of one, at the far end of the tunnel. Gone the next instant. My heart leapt. There was no one there, and yet something had watched us. I crouched to examine the markings again. There were hundreds of them now, tiny scratches running in sequences. Almost like tallies, I couldn't make sense of them. Each set ended abruptly near the shaft. My mind raced. Was it counting something, or warning us? The hum intensified, vibrated through the walls, through my bones. The team was oblivious, adjusting instruments, nodding the temperature gradient. I wanted to tell them to stop, to leave, but curiosity had a grip on me. We had come this far. What was down there? What had the original miners found that they never wrote about? I moved closer to the shaft, flashlight sweeping the edges. The hum now had a rhythm, almost deliberate, like a pulse. My stomach twisted. I bent down and pressed my ear to the cool stone. I could hear it. Something moving just out of sight. Not footsteps, not running, just movement. Careful, deliberate, calculating. One of the teams suggested we take core samples at the edge of the tunnel. I watched them, but my eyes kept drifting back to the shaft. Something about it felt like a boundary, a line we weren't meant to cross. And yet, the urge to see beyond it clawed at me. I knelt to mark the wall with chalk, just to have a reference. My hand trembled slightly, though I didn't admit it. The markings weren't random. They were intentional. Someone had carved a story here, a record of what lay beyond, and it ended at the shaft. The smooth walls reflected my light back at me, creating dozens of me, all watching. I turned quickly, heart hammering. Shadows shifted again, subtly, like they were breathing. My chest tightened. I could feel the corridor responding, aware of us, of me. The team finished their samples and started moving back. I lingered, flashlight hovering near the shaft. The hum pulsed faster now, insistent. A whispering sound brushed at the edge of hearing, too soft to catch words, just a sense of warning. I could feel it in my bones. We were intruding on something older than the mine, older than the mountain itself. I stepped back. The hum retreated slightly, as if acknowledging my hesitation. But the pattern on the walls, I couldn't stop staring. Every line, every curve, every triangle seemed to shift when I blinked. Or maybe it was my mind. Either way, it felt alive. The team called again, urging me to move. I forced myself to follow, leaving the shaft behind. But the corridor didn't end. It wound further, twisting, stretching, smooth walls reflecting more light than possible. The tunnel didn't match any natural formation, any mind map. It existed apart from the world we knew. I glanced back once. For an instant I thought I saw shapes forming in the polished stone. Faces, maybe, or the suggestion of them. They didn't move, not yet, but they waited, watching, patient. And the hum stayed with me, faint now but unmistakable. A pulse, a heartbeat, a warning. As we emerged from the corridor, the mountain seemed quiet again, indifferent. The smooth tunnel behind us vanished in darkness, but I knew it was there, perfectly preserved, waiting for the next curious soul to step inside. I couldn't stop thinking about it on the way back, about the shaft, about the markings, about the hum. Something had been hidden in that corridor, something the miners had avoided, something no survey report would ever mention. And I had seen it, but I didn't yet understand what it wanted. The corridor had secrets, and it wasn't finished telling them. I pressed play on the recorder, my hands shaking. Static hissed for a second before a familiar voice cut through. It was Mark, whispering into the mic, but something was off. His tone wasn't just anxious, it was frantic, like every step he took had weight beyond fear. "Okay, I'm in the corridor now," he said. His words seemed ordinary, but the pauses between them stretched, heavy, unnatural. I could almost feel the emptiness he was walking into. I leaned closer, straining to catch every sound. Then it came, footsteps, behind him, slow, deliberate, not matching his own pace. I froze. There was no one else in that part of the mine when we left. He was alone. I rewound, played it again. There it was, clear now, a shadow walking with him, echoing in the tunnel unseen. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisted. Mark's voice faltered. I don't know who's, a scrape, a low, dragging noise just behind him. He paused, breathing hard as if listening. No, that can't be. The recorder crackled, a faint electrical buzz underneath his voice. Then silence, just footsteps. And they kept coming, circling, sometimes faint, sometimes loud, as if packing him, studying him. I felt sweat prickling my neck. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting jittering shadows across the walls. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the recorder picked up echoes, multiple reflections of his own steps. But no, each footstep had intent. Wait, there was rhythm, cadence, almost intelligence behind it. I could imagine him turning around, catching a glimpse of someone or something that shouldn't exist. Mark whispered again, voice low, trembling. I can hear them breathing behind me. I stopped breathing with him. The tunnel in the recording was black, endless, and yet the sounds weren't echoing into emptiness, they moved. Around him, Mark's voice sped up. I can't keep going. I don't know if I should turn back. Then a shift, a sharp metallic clink, something small dropped or thrown, followed by a scraping sound along the wall. It was close now, too close. I grabbed my own recorder, my hand shaking. I pressed record. The hum of my flashlight filled the silence. My heart drummed. Could it really follow us? Could it have been waiting all along in that tunnel? Mark's voice quivered. If anyone finds this, don't go down here. Don't. Static cut the sentence short. Footsteps stopped abruptly. Then a single heavy step, followed by silence. I rewound, played it again. Something buried itself in the gaps between the words. A low resonance, almost a moan, vibrating in the stone. My throat tightened. Whoever, or whatever, was behind him didn't need to move to be present. Its weight pressed the air, pressed the walls, pressed his mind. I glanced around at the empty corridor in front of me. No one. Just smooth walls, shadows bouncing off my flashlight, a quiet that wasn't quiet. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something was watching, listening, waiting. The recording continued, the tension thickening. Mark's breaths were ragged now, each exhale punctuated by that dragging footstep. I think it knows I'm here. I can hear it right behind me. My hand shook. I pressed pause. I felt like the sound was leaking into my own space, bending the tunnel around me, turning it alive. I could feel the echo of those footsteps in my own chest, vibrating through the floor. My pulse raced. I turned off the recorder, trying to silence the air. Nothing. Just the quiet tunnel, walls gleaming, smooth and perfect. But my eyes kept darting to the shadows at the edges of the beam, waiting, following. I thought about going back, about finding the tunnel Mark had entered, about checking for signs of him, but my instincts screamed no. And yet I couldn't leave it. Couldn't leave him, even if it meant stepping into the same darkness. The recorder clicked off. I put it to my ear one last time, hopping for silence. But even then, a faint rhythm, almost imperceptible, lingered in the playback, the echo of footsteps trailing after nothing. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. The walls seemed to contract around me, reflecting my flashlight like hundreds of tiny eyes. Every smooth surface, every curve of the corridor suggested a presence, aware and patient. I had to get out, had to stop listening. But the recording's memory clung to me, pressing questions into my mind. What followed him? Why did it wait for the last audio to appear? And most unsettling, if it could follow him unseen, had it already found me? I left the corridor, recorder clutched, my thoughts racing. The hum of the tunnel still lingered in my ears. The smooth walls, the footsteps, the whisper of something behind, etched into my mind. And one question remained, gnawing at the edges of reason. When the recorder stops, does it ever truly end? Or does something continue walking behind you, even when you think you're alone? I pulled the folder from the dusty shelf, the paper brittle beneath my fingers. The cover said nothing, just a faded label. Accident Report Level 7 Collapse 1952. I flipped it open and the smell of old paper and mildew hit me. It was thick with everything people leave behind: fear, panic, confusion. And that first line, it grabbed me. At 02:13 hours, the floor gave way beneath the men. 17 missing. 17. That number felt wrong, almost too small for the chaos the report hinted at. I kept reading. Names, ages, years of service, emergency notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. The kind of handwriting that trembles when someone's staring death in the face. I could almost hear the miners shouting, feel the dust filling their lungs. One page made me pause, a note in the margin, barely legible, written by someone called Foreman Harlow. The ground, it's moving, not like a tremor, something alive in the rock. My pulse quickened. Something alive in the rock. It sounded insane. And yet the report continued as if that note was nothing, a distraction. I leaned closer. The next lines described the collapse itself. Beams snapping, walls buckling, screams echoing through the tunnels. But there was more, an odd detail buried in the technical description. The miners claimed they heard, what? Singing, mechanical sirens. No, not mechanical, something human, or worse, something not. The words weren't clear, just fragmented. Voices endless, beneath calling. I shivered. I've been studying mining disasters for years, and I've read every emergency log, every coroner note. Nothing like this had appeared before. Most accidents are simple: human error, weak supports, gas. This felt different, malicious even, like the mine itself was hiding something. I turned the page slowly, careful not to tear it. There were diagrams now, hand-drawn maps of Level 7. But when I compared them to the official geological survey, the tunnels didn't match. Not exactly. Some corridors were omitted or intentionally left vague. Harlow's handwriting marked them with asterisks, like he wanted to warn someone, anyone, without saying it aloud. A faint metallic smell drifted from the papers, like rust and something older, darker. My stomach turned. I could almost see the collapsed floor in my mind, splintered beams jutting at impossible angles, dust clouds rolling through the tunnels. I could imagine them, miners trapped, voices echoing, screaming for help that never came. I reached the testimonies. Survivors' statements were fragmented, each one different but echoing the same thing. The mine moved, it breathed, I felt it watching. Watching. The word pressed against me. Watching, not just a collapse, a presence. I paused again on one entry. Harlow, again. He described going down alone after the collapse, searching for survivors. What he found, he never reported fully. The report mentions it vaguely. The shaft leads deeper than charts show. Something waits, I didn't go further. And that's it. No one followed up. No one explored the shaft. My flashlight flickered in the corner of the room, though I wasn't in the mine. I leaned back, trying to shake the feeling, but the words kept crawling under my skin. Something waits. What could survive under tons of rock, unseen for decades? And why had no one recorded it? Then came the final page, the page that made my hands clammy. It wasn't typed. It was etched into the paper, faint scratches that almost looked burned in. A drawing of the collapse, but beneath it something else. Shapes that didn't belong, lines curving like tunnels, twisting into impossible angles, leading to a wide hollow. At the bottom, tiny marks. Hundreds of them. Symbols, tally marks. Something was counted or trapped. I felt my chest tighten. The tally marks ended abruptly beside a dark rectangle, a shaft, a vertical drop. No one knew what lay below. No one wanted to know. And Harlow had refused to go down, not because he couldn't, because he didn't want to see what was down there. The room around me faded. I could see Level 7 stretching beneath my feet, dark and endless. I imagined stepping carefully, beam by beam, into the hollow. Every step echoed against unseen walls. I imagined the air thickening, dust rising, shadows curling in corners, watching, waiting. I reached the last lines of the report. Harlow's handwriting again, barely legible. Do not go there. Not alone. They are patient. They have been counting for years. Counting? The word twisted in my mind. Counting what? Or whom? And why now, after all these decades, did the report reach me? Did it want me to find it to understand? Or warn me? I set the folder down, but I couldn't stop staring. My reflection in the glass of the shelf seemed off. My eyes felt hollow, like someone had been inside them watching. And the faintest echo, a scraping, slow, deliberate, sounded behind me. My pulse spiked. I whipped around. Nothing. The office was empty. I picked up the folder again. The tally marks called to me. I could almost hear them, faint scratches on the paper turning into echoes in the tunnels. Counting, waiting, patient. And then the final thought hit me, sharp and cold. Whatever survived the collapse of level 7 wasn't trapped. Not anymore. I backed away slowly, hands trembling. The folder weighed nothing, but my mind carried it like stone. I didn't know what I would find if I followed Harlow's path. I didn't know if I wanted to. But deep down, a part of me already did. Because the mind doesn't forget, and the tally never ends. And if I ignore it, the counting continues. Behind the walls, beneath the floor, patient, waiting, watching. I remember the first time I saw him. He emerged from the mine like a ghost, coated in dust and grime, eyes wide but silent. No one knew his name at first, and he didn't offer one. The ambulances had left hours earlier, and yet he walked out alone, barefoot on the jagged rocks, dragging a hand over walls streaked with mud and something darker. I wanted to ask him what happened, but the words caught in my throat. He didn't stop, didn't look at anyone. The other miners were gone. The official reports called it a collapse, an accident. 17 men trapped, 1 survivor. That survivor, him, didn't speak. Not to the press, not to investigators, not even to his own family. He refused everything. Silence was all he offered, and it weighed heavier than any testimony. I found myself drawn to him, watching from a distance. His hands trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from something else. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. Something that came from what he'd seen beneath those shafts. Every time he blinked, I thought I glimpsed shadows moving in his eyes, fragments of tunnels that no map had ever shown. The investigators filled pages with their interpretations. Gas pockets, weak supports, panic, human error. But I didn't believe them. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't screamed. He had survived. That meant he had understood something, something they didn't want to admit, something unspoken. I tried to approach him once. Just a question, nothing more. But as I stepped closer, he froze, and for a moment the air seemed to shift. Dust hung like smoke, and his eyes locked on mine with a weight that made my knees feel heavy. Then he turned, silent as stone, and walked into the night. The wind carried his footsteps, soft and deliberate, fading into nothing. I asked the locals. Some said he had changed after the collapse, that his silence was a warning. Others whispered darker things, that he had seen something waiting in the mine, something that didn't belong to the world above. I didn't want to believe it, but every detail from the reports, every scribbled note from foremen, hinted at more than a simple accident. Weeks later, I found fragments of his story in an old diary tucked away in the municipal archives. He had written for himself, pages filled with sketches of tunnels, strange symbols, and notes that made no sense. He described the collapse, yes, but the words twisted in strange ways. The walls moved on their own. The shadows counted. I was alone, yet followed. Alone, yet followed. My chest tight. The drawings were precise, almost architectural, yet impossible. Corridors that should not exist, shafts that bent at impossible angles, and at the center, a hollow room no one had ever recorded. Tally marks covered one wall, scratched deep, hundreds of them, stopping abruptly at a dark void. He had seen it, and he had refused to speak because some truths he believed should never leave the mind. I wondered what it had done to him, to survive alone in that place. People break in minds, their minds fray. But he hadn't just survived, he carried knowledge no one could handle. And I felt the pull of it, that same dangerous curiosity that had driven him deeper into darkness. I wanted to know what had caused the collapse, but knowing, I realized, might be the same as entering the mine itself. Every report I read afterward seemed hollow, incomplete. Engineers drew diagrams, inspectors wrote notes, yet nothing matched the maps he had sketched. Shadows bent where the rock shouldn't bend, tunnels led into nothing, and air currents whispered as if the mine itself was breathing. And he had walked out, alone, silent. At night I could almost hear him. Not his voice, he never spoke, but the echo of steps, careful, measured, following some rhythm I could not name. I imagined him descending again, tracing tunnels that twisted and doubled back, passing rooms filled with the absent and the trapped. A living record of something that shouldn't exist. I thought about approaching him again, maybe to plead, maybe to beg, but the thought of what I might see, what he had seen, kept me at a distance. And yet the pull didn't fade. The reports, the drawings, the tally marks, they were calling. They whispered in my mind, what lies beneath cannot remain buried, what waits is patient. Then one afternoon a small envelope arrived, no name, no return address. Inside, a single note in handwriting I recognized instantly. Some things cannot be spoken, some things wait, do not follow. The paper smelled of dust and iron as if it had spent decades underground. I held it, heart pounding, and for a moment I thought I could hear him just behind the walls, breathing silently, counting. I realized then that the collapse wasn't just a physical event. It had been a gate, a marker, a warning, and he had survived because he understood it and because he had refused to break the silence. The weight of that knowledge pressed on me, heavy and insistent. I wanted answers, but I feared them. And yet, even as I write this, I can't stop. The tally marks haunt my thoughts. The unmapped corridors call to me. Every night I dream of the mine stretching out, twisting beneath the surface, waiting for someone to return. Waiting, patient, silent, and infinite. I don't know if I will ever see him again or if he will ever speak. But I know this, he survived for a reason. And the reason is not safe. The mine remembers. The shadows count. And one day someone will follow the steps he left behind, into the corridors no one was meant to know. Until then, I sit with the silence, holding fragments of his story, wondering what it was that made him refuse to speak, and fearing that some things, once glimpsed, can never be unseen. Because the survivor saw more than anyone could survive, and I fear, if I listen too closely, I might see it too. I arrived at the site just as the first light touched the jagged ridge above the old mine. The collapse had been decades ago, but the air still smelled of dust and iron, as if the earth itself had held its breath all those years. They had reopened the excavation, digging through layers of debris, and I was there to document it. But I felt that pull, the same one the lone survivor must have felt, the kind of pull that warns you not to proceed, even as curiosity claws at your chest. The dig was slow, methodical. Men in hard hats swung picks and lifted rubble, uncovering fragments of timber, rusted tools, and pieces of machinery that looked abandoned in a hurry. It was orderly, almost ritualistic, as if someone had left instructions for us to find. I walked alongside the cordon, notebook in hand, heart hammering with a mix of fascination and unease. Then through the dust I saw it, a wall of rock that didn't belong. Smooth, unnaturally straight, unlike anything the miners of the 1950s could have cut. It was behind the cave-in, sealed as if to hide something. My fingers itched to touch it. The air around it felt thicker, heavier, and for a moment I thought I heard a whisper, not from a person but from the stone itself. They began to chip away at the debris and I crouched closer. Each stroke of hammer and chisel revealed more. The outline of a door, reinforced by rusted beams, tools left in strange formations. Hammers, wrenches, and picks were arranged like a barricade, pointing inward as if someone had tried to keep something from escaping. The thought made my stomach twist. What had they tried to bury? I inched forward, notebook forgot. The carvings came into view. Strange symbols etched deep into the stone, angular and jagged, repeating across the wall in patterns that made my eyes swim. They were too precise for casual scratching, too deliberate for superstition alone. Someone or something had wanted this chamber concealed, and had built layers of rock and debris to ensure no one would see it. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The workers paused, exchanging nervous glances, but I could not look away. Each carving seemed to pulse under the faint light of our lamps as though alive. I thought I saw shapes in the shadows, human, or something close enough to trick the mind. I had to step back, had to remember I was standing on solid earth and not in a dream. Yet the more I looked, the more the room demanded attention. Inside the barricade, equipment sat arranged in impossible order. Picks leaned against walls at perfect angles, lanterns placed as if to illuminate unseen corners, ropes coiled with mathematical precision. It wasn't abandoned by accident. It was staged. Someone had anticipated discovery. Someone had prepared for us to find it. I noticed a gap, a small opening where the wall had been partially displaced. Through it, darkness spilled, thick and viscous, swallowing the light from our lamps. I heard a faint echo like metal dragging against rock, but no one else seemed to notice. My mind screamed at me to retreat, yet every fiber of my being leaned forward. What waited in that darkness? What had caused the collapse that killed so many decades ago? The miners whispered about superstition, ancient curses, ghosts of men trapped inside the shaft. But I had seen the precision of the barricade, the carvings, the calculated arrangement of tools. This was not a curse. This was strategy, and it suggested intelligence. Someone or something had known exactly what we might do if we broke the seal. I crouched, peering through the gap, and the air changed. It was colder, yet thick, almost sticky. The smell hit me then, old iron, dust, and something else, organic, faint, but undeniable. It carried a rhythm like a heartbeat echoing in the walls. I swallowed hard. The walls seemed to breathe around me, compressing the space, stretching it at the edges of vision. I stepped closer, careful, and noticed scratch marks on the beams of the barricade. Not random, but deliberate, repeated in sequences that almost looked like counting. Hundreds of them, each one a measure of time or warning or ritual. The miners called it superstition, but I recognized it from the survivor's diary. He had written about tally marks too, hundreds of them stopping at a void. The connection made my chest tight. Had he seen this chamber? Had he walked this same corridor, knowing what lay ahead? One of the workers whispered a warning, but I didn't hear him. I was absorbed in the patterns, in the impossible alignment of tools and carvings. A lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape move. Not a person. Too tall, too rigid, too smooth. It vanished as I blinked. My stomach dropped. I realized then that the chamber was more than evidence of a mining disaster. It was a containment. The collapse had been deliberate, a sealing act, not just a tragedy, and the survivor's silence made sense. He had seen the barricade, the carvings, the room beyond, and he had known that words could not convey the horror of what lived there. I backed away, trembling, trying to process what I had seen. The workers carried on, oblivious or too afraid to acknowledge it, and I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that the chamber remained mostly sealed, dread that the secrets of the mine were no longer entirely hidden. But I could not leave. My mind clung to the gap, to the darkness behind the barricade. Every shadow in that void seemed to whisper, calling me to enter, promising answers I was not prepared to hear. And yet I wanted to follow. The survivor had walked this path and returned, silent, haunted. I wondered if I could endure what he had endured, or if I would succumb to the same oppressive weight. I spent the night at the edge of the collapse, lanterns casting long, quivering shadows. The carvings remained in my thoughts, the tally marks in my dreams. I imagined what the miners had faced, what compelled them to arrange tools and barricade the chamber with such care. Fear, understanding, something else older, patient, and waiting. Morning brought sunlight, but it did nothing to ease the dread. The mine seemed alive, almost sentient, its breath deep within the collapsed shafts. I realized that the chamber behind the cave-in was not just history, it was warning. A warning left in stone and metal, carved and arranged to survive decades, waiting for someone to uncover it. And I had uncovered it. I left the site, but the memory clung as if the shadows had followed me above ground. The barricade, the carvings, the hollow darkness, they demanded attention, demanded recognition. And I feared what would happen if anyone pressed further, if someone stepped past the remnants of the collapse into that patient, silent void. I do not know if I will return. Part of me wants to document every detail, trace every mark, understand the purpose of the chamber. But another part of me knows that curiosity is dangerous. Some secrets are not meant to be uncovered, and some voids are too patient, too vast, too hungry to be observed without consequence. As I walk away, I can feel it calling just faintly through the dust and the stone. A whisper through the barricade, a rhythm in the carvings, a heartbeat beneath the collapse. I do not know if the survivor ever truly left that mine, or if he remains behind the stone, silent, guarding the chamber. And I do not know if I would be able to leave should I ever step inside. Because the mine remembers and it waits, and the chamber behind the collapse is patient. It is waiting for someone to finish what the miners started, to understand what they buried, and perhaps to become part of the secret itself. The shadows linger in my mind, the tally marks haunt my thoughts, and I know one truth. Some doors are meant to remain sealed, but human curiosity is relentless, and the mind's patience is infinite. One day, someone will see what I saw, and I fear they may never return. I should have stopped at the entrance. I knew it the moment I crossed the threshold, when the air shifted and carried a weight I couldn't name. The tunnel yawned ahead, black and endless, a ribbon of darkness stretching into the mountain's belly. My boots scraped against broken timber, the sound echoing far too long, bending back to me from somewhere I could not see. It was the first sign that the mine didn't obey normal rules. Sound here had its own mind. I tightened my grip on the lantern. The flame flickered against the rough walls, revealing glimpses of old support beams, fractured stone, and the occasional glint of rusted metal. I could feel the mine pressing on me, the way a predator leans into a shadow. Every step I took multiplied the noises, the distant drip of water, the shuffle of loose stones, and I wasn't sure if they were behind me, above me, or inside the darkness itself. I paused, letting my eyes adjust, and that's when I heard it, a low scrape like iron against rock. I spun, but the tunnel stretched empty on both sides. My heart thundered, echoing, and I realized my own footsteps were joining the rhythm. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. Sounds ahead returned to me slower than they should, distorted, like the mind was replaying my own movements as a mocking echo. The walls curved unexpectedly, the tunnel narrowing, then widening, folding in on itself in ways maps could never capture. I tried to note it, but pencil on paper felt pointless. Nothing here followed rules. I moved forward, each step a negotiation with the darkness, each breath tasting damp and metallic. Somewhere in the distance, a voice, or something close enough to trick my mind, whispered my name. I froze, barely daring to inhale. The sound didn't repeat. It just lingered, curling around the edges of my mind. A sudden shift made me stumble. The tunnel floor sloped without warning, and I slid into a hollow that opened into a wider shaft. Lantern light danced across jagged walls, and there, carved into the rock, were grooves and notches I had never seen in mining tunnels. They were too smooth, too precise. Someone or something had been here long before me, shaping the stone to its own design. My chest tightened. What did it want to show me? I pressed on, flashlight now in hand, swinging it slowly, watching shadows stretch unnaturally. The echoes grew longer, folding back in on themselves. I dropped a stone, listening as it skittered and tumbled, only for its sound to return in fragments, rearranged. It wasn't just echo, it was conversation. The mine had language, and I couldn't understand it. I reached a fork where the passage split in two identical paths, each curving beyond sight. Both seemed equally alive, equally threatening. I hesitated. In one direction, a faint metallic glint caught my eye. In the other, a cold draft whispered through the tunnel, carrying a smell of damp earth and something older, something patient. I chose the glint, convincing myself it was the safer option, though safety was already a lie. As I moved closer, I found remnants of a miner's toolkit scattered haphazardly or not. Hammers leaned against walls at impossible angles, lanterns arranged to cast overlapping shadows, picks placed like markers. The precision was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Someone had choreographed this, waiting for a discovery that might never come. My stomach churned. Who had left this here, and why? I crouched to inspect a carving near the wall. Symbols, jagged and unfamiliar, etched deep into stone, repeated in a rhythm that made my head throb. I ran my finger along one groove and recoiled. The stone vibrated under touch, a subtle hum that grew louder with my heartbeat. I stepped back, breath uneven, mind racing. The mine responded to me. I had awakened it somehow. A noise behind me made me whirl. Nothing, but the air felt heavier, charged. I realized my own breathing had slowed to almost nothing, each inhale seeming to pull shadows toward me. Lantern light flickered and danced across the walls, revealing hints of movement, shapes at the periphery, tall and rigid, slipping out of sight before my eyes could settle. My pulse screamed at me, warning me, but I could not stop. I ventured further, and the sounds became conversations I almost recognized. Footsteps trailing me, whispers, the occasional clang of metal. I told myself it was the mine, an elaborate trick of echoes, but my mind wasn't convinced. Each sound felt intentional, deliberate, as if the darkness itself were walking alongside me, guiding me, testing me. Then I saw the obstruction, a pile of rock and timber blocking the path, older than anything else in the shaft. I approached cautiously. There were marks on the stones, deep gouges like claws or tools I couldn't identify. Some pieces were arranged with deliberate gaps, forming what looked like a crude window. Through it, I glimpsed the tunnel continuing, deeper than it should be, curving impossibly downward. The sense of being watched pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I tried to ignore it, pushing debris aside to squeeze through. The air shifted, colder now, carrying the faint taste of iron and rot. I stepped through and stumbled into a cavity that defied scale, vaulting ceilings, walls etched with strange, repeating patterns, machinery and tools positioned like a barricade. My lantern barely illuminated it, but the space felt alive, responsive. A low hum vibrated in my chest, not from the equipment, but from the stone itself. I moved carefully, flashlight revealing more symbols, more signs that someone had been here, long before any surveyors or miners. Tally marks scraped into beams, hundreds of them, counting something I could not name. I shivered. The survivor's stories returned to me. He had never spoken of this place, yet somehow he had known. He had seen it, understood the mine's secret, and refused to betray it. I felt a thread of understanding, fear curling around it. The echoes grew louder, folding the sounds of my own movements into layers I could not separate. I dropped my pack, knelt, and listened. Footsteps, faint but distinct, moving behind me, yet no one was there. I turned slowly. Shadows shifted, tall shapes just beyond perception, retreating when I focused. I realized then that the mine's tunnels were not merely passages. They were instruments designed to distort, to confuse, to test the mind. I stumbled back toward the opening I had come through. The way out seemed farther than before, the tunnel stretching impossibly, walls bending around me. Every step echoed for seconds longer than it should. Every sound returned altered, as if commenting on my presence. Panic rose, but I forced control, measuring each step, counting, trying to anchor myself in something solid. I emerged hours later, though it might have been days. Outside, sunlight was harsh, alien, and the mountain seemed inert, silent, hiding its living heart. I looked back at the entrance, knowing the mine had not let me go. It had only released me for now. Something waited inside, patient, aware, and I feared what would happen if curiosity ever drew me back. Even now, I feel it in my bones. The mind remembers. Every step, every sound, every shadow lingers in memory. The deepest tunnel is not merely a passage through stone. It is a mirror of the mind, a chamber where perception bends and fear becomes real. And somewhere within, the mind waits for the next foolhardy soul to cross its threshold, to follow the echoes into darkness, and perhaps never return. I carry the memory with me, the hum beneath stone, the impossible patterns, the feeling of being watched. Some nights, I swear I hear the echoes again, faintly in my own home. The mind reaches further than anyone could imagine, and its patience is infinite. One day it will call again, and I fear it may not let me refuse. I step into the shaft, and the darkness swallows me whole before my eyes can even adjust. The air is thick, almost liquid, clinging to my skin and making every breath a negotiation. My lantern barely pushes back the black, and with every step I hear my own footfalls. Then a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, threading itself into the echo. At first, I think I imagined it. But then it speaks my thought. Not a word I said aloud, but a memory I barely acknowledged. I froze, the lantern trembling in my hand. The whisper repeats it, and this time it adds something I didn't even know I could think it. My heart skips a beat. The walls pulse with shadows, stretching, leaning toward me. I'm not alone, not in the conventional sense. I try to move forward, telling myself it's just my mind playing tricks. The mind is old, minds echo, but the whispers aren't random. They answer, they anticipate. I think, who's there? And a faint, quivering voice murmurs back, you shouldn't be. I swallow hard, voice caught somewhere between curiosity and fear. The tunnel seems to tighten, pressing in, and the echoes of my own doubts return in distorted rhythm. The lantern swings as I step carefully over broken beams. Each crack in the timber echoes for seconds longer than it should, overlapping with murmurs that aren't mine. They ask questions I haven't asked, make statements I haven't spoken, and sometimes they just repeat my own thoughts word for word. I realize I've stopped breathing. The whispers are learning me, and I am trying to learn them. A turn in the tunnel reveals something unexpected. A small alcove, walls smoothed unnaturally, faint etchings that catch the dim light. I crouch to inspect, the lantern trembling with my hand. Symbols, curved and jagged, intertwine like writing and movement combined. I press my finger against one and the stone vibrates, a subtle pulse I feel through my bones. The whispers rise, not louder but clearer, repeating my movement, mirroring my thought. Don't touch. I jerk back. My pulse thunders in my ears. The mind seems aware of my fear, feeding it, amplifying it. I move forward slower, trying to ignore the pull, the low murmur of words behind me, words that echo memories I never shared. Somewhere ahead, a metallic clatter. I spin, but the tunnel is empty. Yet the whispers respond, faint, patient, knowing, repeating my question before I even speak it. Did you see that? I try to rationalize, to ground myself. Footsteps echo, mine and theirs, overlapping, mismatched. Every shadow seems to tremble at the edges of vision, reaching for me but vanishing when I focus. The mind is alive in a way that doesn't belong to physics or reason. I'm walking through a presence, and it knows me intimately. Then a change, a new whisper, one that doesn't mimic me. It speaks directly, urgent, precise. Stop, turn back, but I can't. My curiosity is a chain. The deeper tunnel stretches further than it should, the black twisting unnaturally. I press forward, and the whispers grow more confident, forming sentences I recognize but never said aloud. You want to know what lies beyond. You think you can leave unscathed. A hollow opens. My lantern barely reaches the edges. The floor is uneven, littered with debris from a collapse long forgotten. I step carefully. Something shifts in the darkness, movement or suggestion of it, and the whispers answer again before I even realize I feared it. There is someone here with you. I freeze. My mind screams rational explanations, but the voice is correct. Someone or something is watching from just beyond perception. The air grows colder. The pulse in the stone grows stronger beneath my feet, as if the mine itself is resonating with my fear. I drop the lantern for a moment to steady myself. When I lift it again, I see carvings on the wall, more symbols, more patterns that are neither natural nor random. They almost form a language, a record of something that shouldn't exist, and the whispers read them aloud, translating in fragments that make my head spin. Bound, waiting, watching. I move along the edge of the chamber. The whispers respond, overlapping my thoughts. Do you see the walls? The stone remembers. I glance at the carvings again, tracing the lines, the shapes, the precise repetition, and my stomach twists. I understand something I shouldn't understand. Something in the mind wants to teach, wants to show, wants to trap me in comprehension I never asked for. Footsteps echo behind me again. I spin. Nothing. I speak aloud this time. Who is there? The response is immediate, chilling, and familiar. I am what you imagine. The darkness seems to fold inward, listening, responding. I can't distinguish mine from theirs anymore, thought from voice, shadow from substance. Panic begins to rise, but I force it down, counting my steps, marking the rhythm, trying to anchor myself. Another hollow opens. The air smells faintly of iron and old rot. The mine is wet here, water dripping from unseen ceilings. Each drop strikes a puddle with a sound that echoes long after it should. And again the whispers respond before I think them. Do not drink. Do not touch. I look down and see a shallow puddle reflecting my lantern light, and something else. The reflection isn't quite right. My face maybe, but not. My eyes wider, hollow, shadows moving behind them. I take a deep breath and push onward. Each step is measured, deliberate, yet the whispers follow, reading my intentions, shaping my movements, predicting my fear. It's as though the mind itself is a living mind, testing, probing, teaching, punishing. I realize that it does not merely echo, it anticipates. I am not exploring. I am being explored. I reach a chamber where the ceiling vaults impossibly high. Rusted equipment is stacked in patterns I can't decipher. The whispers gather here, louder now, forming sentences, fragments, teasing understanding. Some left, some stayed, some never returned. My pulse spikes. The air vibrates, alive with anticipation. I crouch, examining a piece of machinery. Symbols etched into it pulse faintly with the mind's energy. Do you see? The voices ask. I do, but comprehension chills me. The mind is a recorder of thought, memory, and fear. I am cataloged. Hours or maybe minutes pass. Time feels meaningless. Every corridor, every hollow, every whisper is a layer, building, folding back on itself. I am exhausted, trembling, yet something keeps me moving. I cannot stop. And I know instinctively that the mind will let me leave only when it is ready. It has patience beyond imagining. Finally, I find the exit, or what I think is the exit. Sunlight outside glares harshly, alien, impossible after the oppressive blackness. I step out, blinking, and hear faint whispers trailing me even in the open air, soft but insistent. You will return. We wait, always. My chest heaves, lungs burning, but I walk on, though part of me knows I am marked. The mind remembers everything. It always remembers. Even now, when silence reigns around me, I hear fragments in my mind. Not echoes of the mind, but whispers that preempt my thoughts, suggesting fear I haven't yet felt. The voices are patient, waiting, and I know I will think of them again. I cannot escape them. They are inside me now. Somewhere deep within the mountain, the mind waits, and when curiosity dares, when I, or anyone else, returns, the voices will answer again. Not because they are outside, because they have learned to live inside our own thoughts. They will never stop, and I will never forget.